There are moments in prison when silence becomes a weapon, and Malik Mace Rivers understood this the second Brick tank. Harlan kicked the food tray across the concrete and told him to crawl. The entire yard at Riverside Correctional froze. Guards leaned forward. Cameras' phones appeared. A notorious white supremacist boss had just forced a black man onto his knees in front of 300 inmates, and nobody was stopping it. But Malik didn't beg. He didn't curse. He just breathed, slow, controlled, like a man counting heartbeats instead of humiliation. Brick saw weakness. He saw an opportunity for a show. What he didn't see was the trap closing around him. Now, stay with me until the end of this story. Like and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The sun barely reached the Riverside Correctional Yard, but the heat always did. It poured down in waves that shimmered off the cracked asphalt, turning the entire recreation area into a furnace wrapped in chain link and razor wire. 300 men moved through that space like ghosts who'd forgotten what freedom tasted like. Some playing cards in the shade, others lifting rusted weights, most just standing still because standing still meant you weren't drawing attention. Malik Rivers had been inside for exactly 48 hours, and he'd already learned the most important rule: attention got you killed. He stood near the south fence, hands loose at his sides, watching everything and revealing nothing. At 6'2" with a lean, coiled frame that suggested violence even in stillness, Malik should have been a target from the moment he walked through processing. But there was something about the way he carried himself, something in the absolute calm of his posture, that made men look twice before deciding whether to approach. His cellmate had noticed it too. Reyes Calder sat on a bench 15 feet away, pretending to read a battered paperback while keeping Malik in his peripheral vision. Reyes was 53, built like a fire hydrant, and carried himself with the rigid discipline of a man who'd spent 20 years in the Marines before a bar fight and a bad lawyer landed him in Riverside. He'd seen plenty of new arrivals over his 4-year stretch. Most came in scared and trying to hide it. Some came in angry and broadcasting it. A rare few came in broken and didn't bother hiding anything at all. Malik didn't fit any of those categories. He'd arrived quiet, polite even. Answered Reyes's questions with just enough detail to avoid suspicion, but never enough to invite follow-up. He didn't ask about gangs, didn't posture, didn't try to make friends or enemies. He just existed. Watchful, patient, like a man waiting for something. Reyes didn't trust it. "You got people on the outside?" Reyes had asked the first night testing. "Not anymore," Malik had answered, his voice flat and final. That should have been the end of it. But Reyes had spent 2 decades reading men in combat zones, and everything about Malik screamed contradiction. His hands were scarred in ways that suggested training, not brawling. His breathing never quickened, even when the cell got hot enough to make grown men gasp. And when he moved, even something as simple as climbing onto his bunk, there was a precision to it that didn't belong to a man who'd spent his life on the streets. Reyes had kept those observations to himself. In prison, curiosity got you hurt almost as fast as stupidity. Now, watching Malik stand alone in the yard, Reyes felt that same nagging instinct flare again. Something was wrong, or maybe something was about to be. The shift happened fast. A ripple of movement spread across the yard as inmates turned toward the northern corner, where a group of men had begun to gather. At the center of that group stood a man who didn't need an introduction. Brick Tank Harlan, 6'5", 260 pounds of muscle and tattoos, a shaved head that gleamed like polished stone, and a smile that promised pain. Brick wasn't just an inmate, he was an institution. He'd been running Riverside's white supremacist faction for 8 years, controlling everything from the drug flow to the guard schedules. If you wanted something inside these walls, you paid Brick. If you crossed him, you disappeared. And right now, Brick was staring directly at Malik. "Well, well," Brick's voice carried across the yard like gravel tumbling down a metal slide. "Looks like fresh meat decided to step outside." The yard went quiet. Not the nervous quiet of men avoiding trouble, but the hungry quiet of men who smelled blood. Malik didn't move. He stood exactly where he'd been standing, hands still loose, expression still neutral. But Reyes saw it, a fractional tightening around Malik's eyes that suggested he'd been expecting this moment from the second he arrived. Brick started walking. His crew followed, 5 men, all hard, all decorated with the same coded tattoos that marked them as believers in Brick's particular brand of hatred. They moved with the casual confidence of predators who'd never met resistance. You know what I hate most about new arrivals? Brick stopped 10 feet from Malik, close enough to project dominance, but far enough to savor the approach. They forget their manners, forget to show respect to the men who built this place. Malik said nothing. His breathing remained steady, in through the nose, out through the mouth, like he was meditating instead of staring down a man who'd put 17 inmates in the infirmary over the years. "I'm talking to you, boy." The word hung in the air like a slap. Around the yard, men shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others leaned in, anticipating the response. Malik tilted his head slightly, a gesture so minimal it might have been imagined. "I heard you." Brick's smile widened. "Did you now? Then maybe you also heard that when Brick Harlan speaks, men answer properly. They say, 'Yes, sir,' and 'No, sir,' and they make damn sure their tone matches their position." He took another step forward. "So let's try this again. Did you hear me?" "I heard you," Malik repeated, his voice carrying no more emotion than the first time. The yard held its breath. Brick's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered behind his eyes, something that recognized defiance when it saw it, even wrapped in politeness. "You got a problem with respect?" "I got a problem with the word boy," Malik said quietly. "You want respect? I'll give you respect. But I'm not your boy. I'm not anybody's boy." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Then Brick moved. Not with the wild aggression of an amateur, but with the calculated violence of a man who'd learned that dominance required theater. He stepped forward fast, closed the distance, and before Malik could react, or choose not to, Brick's hand shot out and grabbed the back of Malik's neck, forcing him down. "On your knees." Malik resisted for half a second, muscles tensing under Brick's grip. Then, impossibly, he complied. He sank to his knees on the hot concrete, head bowed, while 300 men watched. Reyes started to rise from his bench. One of Brick's crew, a tattooed bull named Kelso, shook his head slowly. The message was clear. Stay out of it. Reyes sat back down, but his hand found the edge of the bench and gripped it hard enough to make the wood creak. Brick released Malik's neck and stepped back, letting the yard absorb the image. A black man on his knees, a white man standing over him. The symbolism wasn't subtle, and it wasn't accidental. "Now," Brick said loudly, playing to his audience, "let's talk about manners." He turned to one of his crew. "Knox, bring me that tray." Knox Bulldog Mercer, a walking nightmare covered in prison ink and scars, jogged over to a nearby table and grabbed someone's lunch tray. Half-eaten food, spilled juice, a mess of rice and gravy and something that might have been meat once. Knox handed it to Brick with the reverence of a squire presenting a sword. Brick held the tray up, making sure everyone could see it. Then he dropped it. The tray hit the concrete with a wet clatter, food spraying across the asphalt in front of Malik's knees. "Clean it up," Brick said. Malik didn't move. He stayed exactly as he was, head bowed, breathing steady. "I said clean it up." Brick nudged the tray with his boot, sliding it closer to Malik. "With your tongue." Around the yard, phones appeared. Inmates pulled out contraband devices. Smuggled, traded, or bought from guards who looked the other way for the right price. Cameras angled toward the scene. Someone whispered, "This is going on World Star." Malik's shoulders rose and fell with his breath, slow, controlled, like he was counting each inhale, measuring each exhale. "You deaf, boy." There it was again, that word. Brick said it like a challenge, like he was daring Malik to react, to give him an excuse to escalate. Malik lifted his head. Not quickly, not with the defiant snap of a man preparing to fight, but with the deliberate care of someone choosing his moment. His eyes met Brick's, and for just a second, something passed between them that made Brick's smile falter. It wasn't fear in Malik's expression. It wasn't rage. It was nothing, absolutely nothing, a void where emotion should have been. "I'm not deaf," Malik said softly. "I'm patient." Brick blinked. Then he laughed, a harsh, barking sound that covered whatever he'd just felt. "Patient? Brother, Patience ain't gonna save you in here. He gestured to the mess on the ground. Now crawl and lick it clean, or I'll make Knox help you understand the rules. Knox stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. The sound echoed like breaking bones. Malik looked at the food, looked at Brick, then slowly, so slowly that it seemed to take a lifetime, he leaned forward and stopped. Not yet, Malik whispered, so quietly that only Brick could hear. But soon. Brick's face went red. What did you? I said, I'll clean it. Malik's voice returned to normal volume, calm and steady. He placed his hands on the concrete, leaned further forward, and his tongue touched the edge of the spilled rice. The yard erupted. Laughter, jeers, cameras flashing. Brick raised his arms like a conquering general, soaking in the spectacle, while Malik, silent, methodical, licked up food from the filthy prison yard. Reyes watched from his bench, his stomach churning. He'd seen degradation before. He'd seen men broken by the system and each other. But something about this felt different, wrong, because Malik's hands weren't shaking, his breathing hadn't changed, and when Reyes looked closely, really looked, he could see that Malik's eyes weren't focused on the food or Brick or the crowd. They were focused inward, calculating, waiting, like a man playing chess when everyone else thought they were watching a beating. The show lasted 5 minutes. Brick made sure of it. He paced around Malik, narrating for the cameras, throwing in commentary about teaching respect and showing these new bloods how things work. His crew laughed on cue. Inmates filmed. Guards stood at their posts and pretended not to see. When it was finally over, Brick nudged Malik with his boot. Get up. Malik rose smoothly, too smoothly for a man who'd just been humiliated in front of 300 people. There was no tremor in his legs, no hesitation in his movements. He stood at his full height, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and met Brick's eyes again. We done? Malik asked. Brick studied him for a long moment, searching for the crack, the break, the moment when trauma would finally register on Malik's face. He found nothing. For now, Brick said slowly. But you and me? We're just getting started. You're going to learn what happens to men who forget their place. He turned to his crew. Take him to the showers. Knox, make sure he understands the cleaning standards we expect around here. Knox grinned. It was not a pleasant expression. 2 of Brick's men grabbed Malik by the arms. He didn't resist, didn't fight. Just let them lead him across the yard toward the shower block while the crowd slowly dispersed, already posting videos, already spreading the story. Reyes watched them go, every instinct screaming that he should intervene, but he'd survived 4 years in Riverside by knowing when to act and when to stay invisible. This wasn't his fight. Couldn't be his fight. Still, as Malik disappeared into the shower block, Reyes found himself thinking about that moment, that half second when Malik's eyes had gone empty and Brick's smile had faltered. Something was happening here, something beneath the surface that nobody else could see. And Reyes had a terrible feeling that when it finally surfaced, blood was going to follow. Inside the shower block, the air hung thick with moisture and the smell of industrial soap mixed with mildew. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The space was empty. Brick's crew had made sure of that, which meant whatever came next would happen without witnesses. Knox shoved Malik toward the far wall. Strip. Malik complied, pulling off his orange jumpsuit with the same steady calm he'd shown in the yard. He folded it carefully and set it on a bench, then stood in his boxer shorts, waiting. All of it, Knox growled. Malik removed the shorts, stood naked, exposed, vulnerable in every measurable way. Knox circled him like a shark sizing up prey. Brick says you need to learn about cleaning, says you need to understand that everything in here, including you, belongs to him. He stopped in front of Malik. You got anything to say about that? No. No? Knox's hand shot out, grabbing Malik's jaw and squeezing. No what? Malik's eyes remained steady. No, I don't have anything to say. Knox squeezed harder, fingers digging into flesh. You will. They always do. He released Malik and gestured toward the toilet stalls. Start with those. Bare hands. I want them clean enough to eat from. He tossed Malik a scrub brush. No gloves, no cleaning solution, just the brush and the expectation of degradation. Malik took the brush, walked to the first toilet, knelt beside it, and began to clean. Knox and the other two guards watched, making commentary, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, documenting everything with their phones. They expected tears, expected begging, expected the moment when Malik's spirit would finally crack and they could report back to Brick that the new guy had been properly broken. They didn't get it. Malik cleaned 3 toilets, scrubbed the bowls, the bases, the floors around them. His movements were methodical, almost mechanical. When they told him to use his bare hands instead of the brush, he set the brush aside and continued. When they dumped a bucket of filthy mop water across the floor and told him to clean it up with his jumpsuit, he did. An hour passed. Knox's amusement began to curdle into frustration. "You got something wrong with you? You retarded or something?" Malik wrung out his jumpsuit in a sink. "No." "Then why ain't you fighting back? Why ain't you crying or begging or doing something?" Malik turned, water dripping from his hands. "Would it change anything if I did?" The question hung in the air like a challenge disguised as philosophy. Knox stepped forward, getting into Malik's personal space. "You think you're smart? You think staying quiet makes you strong?" He shoved Malik hard enough to send him stumbling back against the sink. "It don't. It just makes you meat, and meat gets used however Brick wants to use it." Malik steadied himself, his expression unchanged. "Then I'm meat." Knox hit him, a solid right cross that snapped Malik's head to the side and split his lip. Blood ran down his chin, bright red against dark skin. Malik absorbed the blow, straightened, spit blood into the sink. "Again," Malik said quietly. Knox froze. "What?" "You're going to hit me again anyway. Might as well get it over with." Something in Knox's face shifted. A flicker of uncertainty that suggested he was starting to realize this wasn't going the way it usually did. Normally, after the first punch, men either fought back or folded. They gave Knox something to work with, a reaction, a narrative. Malik gave him nothing. Knox hit him again. Harder this time. Malik's head snapped back, cracking against the concrete wall. More blood. Malik didn't make a sound. "Freak," Knox muttered. He turned to the other 2 men. "Get him dressed. We're done here." They threw Malik's wet jumpsuit at him and watched as he pulled it on without complaint. Then they marched him back across the yard, now mostly empty as inmates headed to dinner, and delivered him to his cell. Reyes was waiting. He took one look at Malik's swelling face, split lip, and soaked jumpsuit and felt his jaw tighten. "They work you over?" Malik climbed onto his bunk, moving stiffly but without apparent pain. "Standard welcome package." Brick's sending a message. "I know." Reyes waited for more. When it didn't come, he leaned forward. "Listen, I don't know what you did on the outside to get on his radar, but you need to understand something. Brick don't just hurt people for fun. He does it to build his brand. You're going to be his example for the next month, maybe longer, until he finds someone else, or you find a way to buy him off." "I'm not buying him off." "Then you're going to have a real short stay here." Reyes kept his voice low, aware that walls had ears even when cells seemed empty. "He's got guards on payroll. He's got connections to gangs on the outside. You can't win against him by taking punches." Malik finally looked at him. "I'm not trying to win." "Then what are you trying to do?" "Survive." The word carried weight that Reyes couldn't quite place. It wasn't resignation. It was something colder, more calculated. "By letting him turn you into his personal punching bag? If that's what it takes?" Reyes shook his head. "You're either the craziest son of a bitch I've ever met, or the dumbest." "Maybe both." Malik closed his eyes. "Wake me for count." And just like that, the conversation was over. Reyes sat on his own bunk, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what he'd just witnessed. 48 hours. That's all it had been. 48 hours and Malik had already become Brick's primary target. But instead of fighting back or trying to negotiate, or even just breaking down, Malik was enduring, like he'd expected it, like he'd planned for it. The thought lodged in Reyes's mind and wouldn't let go. He'd spent 20 years in military intelligence, and he knew when something didn't add up. Malik's calm wasn't natural. His precision wasn't accidental. And that moment in the shower when Knox had demanded a reaction and gotten nothing, that wasn't the behavior of a broken man or even a scared one. That was the behavior of a man with a mission. Reyes wanted to ask, wanted to dig deeper. But prison had taught him that some questions got you killed faster than stupidity, so he stayed quiet. Above him, in the gathering darkness of their cell, Malik lay perfectly still. His breathing had already slowed to the deep, steady rhythm of sleep, or something that looked enough like sleep to pass inspection. But his mind was wide awake, counting, calculating, waiting for the next move in a game that Brick Harlan didn't even know he was playing. The next 72 hours became a masterclass in systematic degradation. Brick didn't just target Malik. He made targeting Malik into entertainment. During meals, he'd have his crew trip Malik in the food line, sending his tray crashing to the floor. Then he'd make Malik clean it up while the entire cafeteria watched and laughed. During yard time, Brick would announce training sessions over the contraband PA system someone had rigged in the rec area, and Malik would be forced to do push-ups, sit-ups, or run laps until his muscles screamed. But the worst part wasn't the physical abuse, it was the cameras. Brick had turned Malik's humiliation into content. He'd set up a system where paying subscribers on the outside, white supremacists, extremists, people who got off on watching power dynamics play out in real time, could log into a private stream and watch Malik's degradation live. Every push-up, every insult, every moment of forced submission. "We got 17,000 viewers right now," Brick announced one afternoon, holding up his phone to show Malik the viewer count. "You're famous, boy. People all over the country are watching you learn your place." Malik didn't respond. He never did. He just continued his push-ups, 47, 48, 49, while Brick narrated for his audience. "Look at this dedication. This is what happens when you teach a man proper respect. You break the attitude and rebuild the understanding. Right now, our friend Mace here is learning that resistance is exhausting, that pride is expensive, that the only path forward is through acceptance." 50, 51, 1, 52. Malik's arms trembled. Sweat poured down his face, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant Brick won something more valuable than a fight. It meant Brick proved that Malik's will could be broken. At 75 push-ups, Malik's arms finally gave out. He collapsed onto the concrete, chest heaving. Brick's boot appeared next to his face. "Pathetic. Get up." Malik pushed himself to his hands and knees. "Faster." Malik stood, swaying slightly. "Now thank me." This was new. Brick had been pushing boundaries, but this was the first time he'd demanded verbal submission beyond simple compliance. The yard went quiet. Even the guards stopped their conversations to watch. Malik looked at Brick. His face was a mask of sweat and exhaustion, but his eyes, those eyes remained clear, focused. "Thank you," Malik said. Brick leaned in. "For what?" "For the lesson." It should have been enough, should have satisfied Brick's need for dominance. But something in Malik's tone, that flat, emotionless delivery, suggested he was reading from a script rather than speaking from fear. Brick didn't like it. "Say it like you mean it. Thank you for the lesson." Louder. "Thank you for the lesson." Brick's hand shot out, grabbing Malik's throat. "With feeling, boy, like you understand what's being given to you." Malik's hand stayed at his sides. No resistance, no fight, just steady breathing through a constricted airway. "Thank you," Malik whispered, "for teaching me patience." Brick released him with a shove. "Get out of my sight." Malik walked away without looking back, and for just a moment, so brief that most people missed it, Brick's expression flickered, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to frustration. Because every humiliation was supposed to create a reaction. Every degradation was supposed to produce evidence of breaking, and Malik kept refusing to give him that satisfaction. Reyes saw it from across the yard. He'd been watching the whole spectacle with growing unease, and that flicker in Brick's expression confirmed something he'd been suspecting. Brick wasn't winning. Not really. He was performing victory, but beneath the theater, he was starting to realize that Malik wasn't like other targets. The humiliation wasn't landing the way it should. The pain wasn't producing the expected results. And that made Brick dangerous. Because men like Brick Harlan didn't accept draws. They couldn't afford to. Their entire power structure depended on absolute dominance, and anything less than total victory felt like defeat, which meant Brick was going to escalate. The question was how far. Reyes got his answer that night. Lights out came at 10 p.m., but the cell block never really got dark. Emergency lighting kept everything in a perpetual twilight, and the sounds of 300 men trying to sleep, or pretending to, created a background hum that made true rest impossible. Malik lay on his bunk, eyes closed, breathing steady. Below him, Reyes stared at the ceiling and wondered if he should warn him about what was coming, because Reyes had lived in Riverside long enough to recognize patterns. Brick's escalation followed a predictable arc: humiliation, isolation, then physical punishment that couldn't be traced back to him directly. Men got jumped in the showers, fell downstairs, had accidents in the workshop. The system protected Brick because the system needed him. He kept the gangs balanced, kept the drug flow manageable, kept the violence organized instead of chaotic. And in return, guards looked the other way when Brick needed them to. Reyes opened his mouth to speak, to warn Malik that the real danger was coming, but before he could, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside their cell. Heavy footsteps. Multiple sets. Reyes sat up slowly. The footsteps stopped outside their door. Keys rattled. The lock clicked. The door slid open with a metallic screech that made Reyes's teeth ache. 3 guards stood in the doorway. Not the regular night crew. These were Brick's men, the ones who supplemented their prison salaries with cash from Brick's various enterprises. "Rivers," the lead guard said. "You're wanted." Malik didn't move. "For what?" "Don't matter. Get up." Malik swung his legs over the side of his bunk and dropped to the floor. He moved with that same unhurried precision, like he'd been expecting this visit. Reyes found his voice. "Where are you taking him?" The guard didn't even look at him. "Mind your business, Calder. He's my cellmate. That makes it my business." The guard's hand moved to his baton. "You want to join him? Because I can arrange that." Reyes's military training screamed at him to stand down. Engaging would only make things worse, but every instinct as a human being told him that letting Malik walk out that door, alone, at night, with guards on Brick's payroll, was a death sentence. Malik solved the dilemma by speaking first. "I'll be back," he said quietly. Not to the guards, to Reyes. "Don't worry." Then he let them cuff him and lead him away. The door slid shut behind them. Reyes sat in the darkness, listening to footsteps fade down the corridor, and felt the weight of helplessness settle over him like a shroud. He'd made a promise to himself 4 years ago. Survive your time, don't make enemies, don't get involved in other people's wars. It was the only way to make it through a sentence without losing your mind or your life. But something about Malik, about his absolute calm in the face of terror, had cracked that resolve. Reyes didn't know what Malik had done on the outside, didn't know why Brick had fixated on him so completely, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Malik came back from wherever they were taking him, he wasn't going to come back whole. They walked Malik through empty corridors, past locked cells and darkened common areas, deeper into the prison than regular inmates were allowed to go. This was administrative territory, offices, storage rooms, places where the architecture of power lived away from public view. The lead guard stopped at a door marked maintenance storage and unlocked it. Inside, the room had been cleared of supplies. In their place stood Brick Harlan, Knox Mercer, and 2 other members of Brick's inner circle, and a camera on a tripod, already recording. Malik took it all in with a single sweep of his eyes. The room, the men, the camera, the implications. "Welcome to prime time," Brick said, gesturing to the setup like a game show host. "We got 40,000 people tuned in right now waiting to see the finale of your little education." He walked slowly around Malik, letting the camera capture every angle. "See, I've been thinking about your attitude problem, about how you keep taking punishment without learning the lesson. And I realized I've been too gentle." Knox stepped forward, holding something behind his back. "So tonight," Brick continued, "we're going to try something different. Something that'll make sure you understand once and for all what happens to men who don't respect the hierarchy." He nodded to Knox. Knox brought his hands around. He was holding a pillowcase filled with something heavy, bars of soap maybe, or batteries. A a classic prison weapon that left minimal evidence but maximum damage. Malik looked at it, looked at Brick, said nothing. "Any last words?" Brick asked, playing to his audience. "Any final defiance you want to get out before we teach you some humility?" Malik's gaze moved to the camera. For the first time since arriving at Riverside, something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not anger, recognition, like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Just one thing," Malik said quietly. "Yeah, what's that?" Malik smiled. It was a terrible expression, not joyful or mocking, but filled with a patience that suggested he knew something everyone else in the room had missed. "You should have stayed in the yard." Brick blinked. "What?" Knox swung the pillowcase, and Malik moved. The pillowcase cut through the air with a whistle that promised broken bones, but it never connected. Malik's body shifted, not with the wild desperation of a man fighting for survival, but with the fluid precision of someone who'd practiced this exact movement 10,000 times. His shoulder dipped, his head turned, and the makeshift weapon passed through empty space where his skull had been a heartbeat before. Knox stumbled forward from the momentum, his weight carried by a swing that should have ended the fight before it started. Before he could recover, Malik's hand snapped out and caught Knox's wrist, not grabbing, but guiding, redirecting the energy of the attack into a tight circle that sent Knox spinning like a dancer who'd missed his cue. The room went silent except for the soft whir of the camera capturing everything. Brick's smile vanished. "What the—" Malik released Knox's wrist and stepped back, hands returning to his sides. He wasn't breathing hard, wasn't sweating, just standing there like nothing had happened, while Knox caught his balance and stared at him with confusion that was rapidly turning into rage. "Hold up," one of the other crew members said, his voice uncertain. "Did he just—" "Shut up," Brick snapped. He turned to Knox. "Again, don't play with him this time." Knox's jaw tightened. He hefted the pillowcase, adjusted his grip, and came at Malik with both hands this time, a two-handed overhead swing designed to drive Malik into the concrete floor like a tent stake. Malik slipped left. The pillowcase hit the ground with a heavy thud that cracked the concrete. Knox followed up immediately, swinging horizontally, then vertically, then in a wild combination that should have trapped Malik against the wall. But Malik wasn't there anymore. He moved like water, flowing around each strike with minimal effort, his feet barely lifting off the ground. Every dodge was economical. Every shift was precisely calculated. And through it all, his hands remained loose at his sides. Never forming fists, never preparing counterattacks, just waiting. Knox swung 15 times in 20 seconds. 15 times he hit nothing but air. On the 16th swing, he dropped the pillowcase and charged straight at Malik, going for a tackle that would have put a linebacker in the hospital. Malik stepped into the charge instead of away from it, his hands finally coming up, not to strike, but to redirect. He caught Knox's momentum with an open palm against the bigger man's chest, turned his hips, and suddenly Knox was airborne, flipping over Malik's hip and crashing into the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. Knox slumped to the floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The room exploded into motion. The other two crew members rushed Malik simultaneously from opposite angles, trying to overwhelm him with numbers. Malik dropped low, sweeping one man's legs while rising into the other's charge, using the second attacker's own momentum to send him stumbling into his partner. They collapsed in a tangle of limbs and cursing. 10 seconds. That's how long it took Malik to dismantle 3 hardened criminals without throwing a single punch. Brick stared at the wreckage of his crew, his face cycling through expressions too fast to name. Shock, confusion, and finally, something that looked almost like fear. "Who the hell are you?" Brick's voice came out quieter than he'd intended, the question meant for himself as much as for Malik. Malik straightened, brushing dust off his jumpsuit with the casual care of a man who'd just finished a light workout. "Nobody important." "Bullshit." Brick's hand moved to his waistband where a shiv had been hidden all along. He pulled it out, 6 inches of sharpened metal wrapped in electrical tape, and held it like a man who knew how to use it. "You move like that, you ain't just some random fish who landed in Gen Pop. You got training, professional training." "Maybe." "Maybe?" Brick took a step forward, the knife leading. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't recognize a fighter when I see one?" His voice was rising now, the confident showman replaced by something more dangerous, a cornered predator who'd just realized his prey had teeth. Who sent you? The Mexicans? The Brotherhood? Who's paying you to move on me? Malik said nothing, just stood there with that infuriating calm, watching Brick like a scientist observing a specimen. Answer me! Brick lunged with the knife, a wild thrust aimed at Malik's gut. Malik sidestepped. His hand shot out, caught Brick's wrist, and twisted. The knife clattered to the floor. Before Brick could process what had happened, Malik had him in a lock, arm bent at an unnatural angle, body forced forward, face pressed against the wall. Listen carefully, Malik said, his voice so quiet the camera barely picked it up. I'm not here to kill you. I'm not here to take over. I'm here because you made a mistake, and now you're going to pay for it. But not tonight. He released Brick with a gentle push. Tonight, you get to walk away. Use that time to think about what happens when you build an empire on cameras and cruelty. He stepped back, putting distance between them. Brick spun around, rubbing his wrist, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. You think this is over? You think you can embarrass me in front of 40,000 people and just walk away? I think, Malik said, moving toward the door, that those 40,000 people just watched me defend myself without throwing a punch. They watched your crew attack an unarmed man and fail. They watched you pull a knife and lose it in 3 seconds. He paused at the doorway. Your brand just took a hit, Brick. The only question is whether you're smart enough to cut your losses or dumb enough to make it worse. The guards who'd brought Malik stood frozen in the hallway, unsure whether to intervene. One of them had his radio halfway to his mouth before Brick's voice stopped him. Let him go. The guard lowered the radio. But I said let him go. Brick's roar echoed through the corridor. Get him out of my sight before I change my mind. They grabbed Malik and hustled him back toward his cell, moving fast like men who wanted to be anywhere else. Behind them, they could hear Brick shouting at his crew, the sound of breaking equipment, and the sharp crack of the camera tripod being smashed against the wall. When they reached Malik's cell and uncuffed him, the lead guard leaned in close. I don't know what you did back there, but you just made yourself a dead man. Brick don't forget. He don't forgive. You understand? Malik rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been. I understand. No, I don't think you do. The guard's voice dropped to a whisper. He's going to come at you with everything. Guards, inmates, people on the outside. He's going to make what happened tonight look like a welcome party. He stepped back. Whatever you think you're doing here, it ain't worth dying for. The door slid shut. Reyes sat up on his bunk, his eyes wide in the dim light. What happened? I heard shouting, and... He stopped mid-sentence as he took in Malik's appearance. No blood, no bruises, no signs of the beating everyone had expected. Did they take you to the wrong room or something? Malik climbed onto his bunk. Something like that. Malik. Reyes's voice carried a weight that demanded attention. What the hell is going on? And don't give me that nothing bullshit. I've been watching you for 3 days, and nothing about you makes sense. You take beatings like they're meditation exercises. You clean toilets without flinching. You let Brick humiliate you in front of the whole yard. But tonight, he gestured at Malik's unmarked face. Tonight, you walk back from a private session with Brick's crew looking like you just went for a stroll. So either you made a deal or something else happened down there. Malik stared at the ceiling. For a long moment, the only sound was the ambient noise of the cell block, distant conversations, someone coughing, the clank of pipes in the walls. I defended myself, Malik finally said, against 3 of Brick's best, plus Brick himself. 4. There were guards too, but they stayed back. Reyes let out a slow breath. You're telling me you fought off 4 men and walked away without a scratch? I'm telling you I didn't let them hurt me. There's a difference. What kind of difference? Malik turned his head, making eye contact. The kind that matters when you're trying to survive long enough to finish something. Finish what? Something that started long before I got here. It wasn't an answer, but the way Malik said it, with finality that suggested the conversation was over, made Reyes understand that pushing further would be pointless. Whatever Malik was involved in, whatever reason he had for accepting 3 days of humiliation before finally showing his hand, it was bigger than prison politics. Reyes lay back down, his mind racing. 20 years in military intelligence had taught him to recognize operations when he saw them. The way Malik carried himself, the way he'd endured targeted abuse without breaking, the precision of his movements when he finally acted, it all pointed to someone with training, professional training, the kind you didn't get in street fights or amateur boxing gyms. "You were military," Reyes said to the darkness. "No." "Law enforcement?" Silence. "Private security? MMA? What?" More silence. Then, so quietly that Reyes almost missed it. "Does it matter?" "It matters if Brick decides to escalate. It matters if you just painted a target on both our backs by humiliating him in front of his audience. I didn't humiliate him. I survived, and if he's smart, he'll recognize the difference and back off." Reyes snorted. "Brick Harlan doesn't back off. That's not how he stays in power. He can't afford to look weak, which means he can't afford to let tonight stand. Whatever you did down there, it's going to come back on you twice as hard." "I know. And you're okay with that?" "I'm prepared for it." The distinction hung in the air like smoke. Reyes wanted to dig deeper, wanted to understand what Malik was preparing for and why he seemed so certain that whatever came next was survivable. But exhaustion pulled at him, and the clock on the wall showed it was past midnight. "Get some sleep," Reyes muttered. "Tomorrow's going to be ugly." "Tomorrow's going to be exactly what it needs to be," Malik replied. Within minutes, Reyes heard the telltale rhythm of Malik's breathing shift into sleep, or that meditation-like state that passed for it. How the man could find peace after what had just happened was beyond comprehension. But as Reyes lay there in the dark, listening to 300 men settle into their own fitful rest, he couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow wasn't going to be ugly. It was going to be explosive. The morning came fast and hostile. Word about what happened in the maintenance room had spread through the prison's underground communication network like fire through dry grass. By the time breakfast rolled around, everyone knew that Brick's crew had taken Malik for a private beatdown, and Malik had walked out untouched. The theories multiplied with each retelling. Some inmates claimed Malik had made a deal, snitched on someone to buy protection. Others said he'd paid Brick off with outside money. A few whispered that Malik was secretly connected to one of the Mexican cartels, and Brick had realized too late who he was messing with. Nobody guessed the truth because the truth was too strange to believe. Malik had simply defended himself with skills that shouldn't exist in a random inmate. The cafeteria buzzed with nervous energy when Malik and Reyes walked in for breakfast. Conversations died mid-sentence. Men stepped aside to let them pass. Even the guards seemed tense, hands resting on batons, eyes tracking Malik's every movement. Brick sat at his usual table in the far corner, surrounded by his crew. Knox was there too, moving stiffly, a dark bruise visible on his jaw where he'd hit the wall. They watched Malik with expressions that ranged from confusion to barely contained rage. Malik grabbed a tray, got his food, and sat at an empty table near the middle of the room. Reyes joined him, positioning himself so he could see both Brick's table and the exits. "Everyone's staring," Reyes said quietly. "Let them. You realize you've turned yourself into the biggest target in this place, right? Every wannabe tough guy is going to want to test you now. Every gang is going to want to recruit you or eliminate you. You can't just—" "I can," Malik interrupted, spooning eggs into his mouth with mechanical efficiency. "I can do exactly what I've been doing. Exist, endure, wait." "Wait for what?" Malik didn't answer. His attention had shifted to the cafeteria entrance, where a new arrival stood surveying the room with the practiced eye of a predator. The man was in his 40s, tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair cut military short and eyes that missed nothing. He wore the khaki uniform of a senior corrections officer, but there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he wasn't just another guard punching a clock. He scanned the room once, his gaze pausing briefly on Brick's table before moving to Malik. Something passed between them. Not recognition exactly, but acknowledgement. The kind of silent communication that happens between people who share classified information. Then the man turned and left. Reyes caught the exchange. "Who was that?" "Nobody." "Malik, drop it." The warning in Malik's voice was clear enough that Reyes did exactly that, but he filed the information away in the growing folder of things that didn't make sense about his cellmate. Breakfast ended without incident, but the tension in the air felt like humidity before a thunderstorm, oppressive and building toward something inevitable. The explosion came during afternoon yard time. Malik was in his usual spot near the south fence, watching the flow of prison life without participating in it, when Brick's voice boomed across the PA system. "Attention, gentlemen! We got ourselves a situation that needs addressing." 300 men stopped what they were doing and turned toward the makeshift stage area where Brick stood with a microphone. Behind him, a projection screen had been set up, contraband equipment that technically wasn't allowed but functioned anyway because the guards on duty were the ones who'd helped install it. "Last night," Brick continued, his voice echoing off the concrete walls, "something remarkable happened. Our new friend Mace Rivers got himself into a little altercation with some of my associates. Now, normally, I wouldn't waste everyone's time talking about every scuffle that happens in this facility. But this one's special." He gestured to someone off stage. The projection screen flickered to life, showing footage from the maintenance room camera. Reyes grabbed Malik's arm. "We need to move. Now." But Malik stayed rooted in place, his eyes locked on the screen as it showed him dodging Knox's attacks with impossible precision. The footage was high quality, good enough that every movement was visible, every technique clear. "See that?" Brick's voice dripped with theatrical outrage. "That's not a regular inmate defending himself. That's professional training. That's the kind of movement you see in combat sports, in MMA." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "Which made me curious, so I did some digging, made some calls to people on the outside who know things." The screen changed. Now it showed a different kind of footage. Grainy phone video from years ago. An octagon. 2 fighters. One of them moved with fluid grace that made violence look like ballet. Reyes felt his stomach drop. "Oh no. That's Malik the Wraith Rivers," Brick announced, his voice rising with vindication. "Disappeared from the MMA world 5 years ago after going 15-0 in professional fights. Never lost a round. Never got hit clean. Just vanished one day and everyone assumed he was done. But he wasn't done." Brick turned to stare directly at Malik across the yard. He was hiding, pretending to be a regular criminal when he's actually a trained killer who could snap most of us in half. The yard erupted in chaos. Some inmates backed away from Malik, like he was radioactive. Others moved closer, drawn by the promise of violence. The guards tensed, hands on weapons, waiting to see which way the situation would break. Malik remained perfectly still, his face unreadable. "Now, here's my question," Brick said, walking to the edge of the stage. "Why would a world-class fighter come to Riverside Correctional and pretend to be nobody? Why would he take beatings without fighting back? Why would he clean toilets and crawl on the ground when he could have ended any of us at any time?" He spread his arms wide. "Unless he's here for a reason. Unless someone sent him. Unless he's not really an inmate at all." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. "So I'm giving you a choice, Mace, or Wraith, or whatever you want to call yourself. You can tell everyone the truth about why you're here. You can explain who you're working for and what your real mission is. Or," Brick smiled, and it was not a kind expression, "or we can have ourselves a demonstration, right here, right now. You versus my boy Knox in a fair fight. Winner walks away. Loser gets to explain things from the infirmary." Knox stepped onto the stage, cracking his knuckles. He looked like a man who'd spent all night planning his revenge and couldn't wait to execute it. Malik finally moved. He walked forward through the crowd, which parted like water around a shark. He stopped 10 feet from the stage and looked up at Brick with that same unnerving calm. "I'll fight," Malik said, "but not Knox." Brick's eyebrows rose. "No? Then who?" "You." The yard went silent. Even the guards stopped moving. Brick laughed, a sharp barking sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You want to fight me? Brother, I got 30 pounds on you, and I've been beating men unconscious since before you learned to walk." "I know," Malik said. "That's why it has to be you. Knox is just following orders. Your crew is just muscle. But you're the one who decided degradation was entertainment. You're the one who turned humiliation into a business model. So if we're going to do this, we do it right. You and me. No weapons, no backup, just 2 men settling things the old way." Brick's smile faded. He looked out at the crowd, at the cameras recording everything, at the audience that was now watching to see if he'd accept or back down. He couldn't back down. Not now. Not with 40,000 people watching the live stream and 300 inmates waiting to see if their king would defend his throne. "All right," Brick said slowly. "Oi, you want a shot at the title? You got it. But we do this my way. Not some regulated MMA bullshit with rules and referees. We do this prison style. Last man standing, no tapping out, no stopping until one of us can't get up." He jumped down from the stage and walked to the center of the yard. The crowd formed a circle around him, creating an impromptu arena. Malik followed, stripping off his shirt as he walked. His torso was a map of old scars and new bruises, evidence of 3 days of punishment. But underneath the damage, muscle moved with the efficient grace of a machine built for one purpose. Reyes pushed through the crowd to grab Malik's arm one more time. "Don't do this. This is exactly what he wants, a chance to hurt you legally. If you beat him, his crew will jump you anyway. If you lose, you're done. There's no winning here." Malik looked at him with something that might have been gratitude. "I'm not trying to win, Reyes. I'm trying to expose him. There's a difference." "Expose him how? By getting beaten to death on camera? By making him show everyone who he really is when the cameras are watching and he can't hide behind edited footage or paid witnesses?" Malik pulled his arm free gently. "Trust me. I know what I'm doing." He stepped into the circle. Brick stood opposite him, rolling his massive shoulders, his face split in a grin that promised pain. "Last chance to back out, Wraith. Last chance to admit you're in over your head." Malik settled into a stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands up but loose, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Brick charged. The impact of 260 pounds of muscle and rage should have crushed Malik into the concrete, should have ended the fight before it started. But Brick's massive frame crashed through empty air as Malik pivoted left with such minimal movement that he seemed to phase out of existence rather than dodge. The crowd gasped collectively as Brick stumbled forward, momentum carrying him 3 steps past where Malik had been standing. Malik didn't counterattack. He simply reset his stance and waited. Brick spun around, his face already flushing red with exertion and embarrassment. "Stand still, you—" He lunged again, this time with a wide haymaker designed to decapitate anyone in its path. Malik ducked under it so smoothly that the punch might as well have been thrown in slow motion. Brick followed with a left hook, then a right cross, then a combination that would have hospitalized most men. Each strike found nothing but air, while Malik weaved between them like smoke through a screen door. The inmates watching began to murmur. This wasn't a fight, it was a demonstration. A masterclass in the difference between brawling and precision. "Fight back!" Brick roared, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Stop running and fight me like a man!" Malik's response was to slip another punch so close that Brick's fist grazed his cheek without landing. "I'm not running. I'm showing you what you've been hitting for 3 days." The words struck harder than any punch could have, because everyone watching suddenly understood what Malik had endured, not because he couldn't defend himself, but because he chose not to. Every humiliation, every degradation, every moment of forced submission had been a conscious decision by a man who could have ended Brick at any point. Brick seemed to realize it too. His attacks became wilder, more desperate, fueled by the growing understanding that he'd been played. He bull-rushed Malik, trying to use his superior size to grapple and ground fight where precision mattered less than raw power. Malik sidestepped at the last second, his hand shooting out to tap Brick's shoulder as he passed. A gesture so casual and dismissive that it drew laughter from some inmates. Brick whirled around, and for the first time, fear flickered behind the rage in his eyes. "What's wrong?" Malik asked quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "You spent 3 days telling everyone I needed to learn my place, telling your audience that dominance was about breaking the weak. But now you're the one looking weak, Brick. Now you're the one who can't land a hit." Brick charged again, abandoning all technique in favor of pure aggression. Malik let him come close this time, close enough that Brick's hands actually touched fabric. Then Malik's hips turned, his balance shifted, and suddenly, Brick was airborne, flying over Malik's shoulder in a perfect judo throw that slammed him into the concrete hard enough to crack the surface. The impact drove the air from Brick's lungs in a violent wheeze. He lay there gasping while the crowd erupted in shouts and cheers. Some were celebrating the upset. Others were simply reacting to the spectacle. But everyone understood they were witnessing something that would become prison legend. Malik stood over Brick but didn't press the advantage. "Get up." Brick rolled onto his side, coughing, trying to force oxygen back into his lungs. His crew started to move forward, but Malik's voice stopped them. "Anyone steps in, I walk away." And Brick gets to explain to everyone watching how he needed 5 men to beat one. Knox froze mid-step, torn between loyalty and the certain knowledge that interfering now would destroy whatever was left of Brick's reputation. The other crew members looked at each other, waiting for someone else to make the decision. Brick solved it by pushing himself to his feet. Blood dripped from his nose where his face had met concrete. His breathing came in ragged gasps, but he was standing, and that meant the fight continued. "I'm gonna kill you," Brick panted, the promise lacking conviction. "Gonna beat you until there's nothing left but—" Malik moved in close, inside Brick's guard before the bigger man could react. His hand came up, not in a punch, but pressing firmly against Brick's chest. He pushed, and Brick stumbled backward, his legs unsteady beneath him. "You're not going to kill me," Malik said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Because killing me means you lose control of the narrative. And control is all you really have, isn't it? The drugs, the guards, the live streams. It's all about controlling the story, about making people believe you're untouchable." He pushed again. Brick backpedaled, arms windmilling for balance. But here's the problem with building your empire on cameras and audiences. They see everything, including this. Malik gestured at the crowd, at the phones recording every moment, including you getting dominated by a man you spent 3 days calling weak. Brick swung wildly, a desperate right hand that telegraphed so obviously that Malik had time to consider 3 different defensive options before choosing the simplest, a lean back that made the punch miss by inches. "And now you've got a choice," Malik continued, his tone almost conversational despite the violence swirling around them. "You can keep swinging until you collapse from exhaustion and humiliation, or you can stop, walk away, and maybe, salvage something from this disaster you created." "Never," Brick spat blood onto the concrete. "I don't walk away. I don't back down. This is my prison, and you're just—" Malik hit him, finally. A single jab that snapped Brick's head back and sent him stumbling into the crowd. It wasn't a knockout punch. Malik had pulled it enough to avoid serious damage, but the message was clear. He could end this whenever he wanted. Brick caught himself against the inmates behind him, who pushed him back toward the center of the circle. His eyes were unfocused now, his movements sluggish. The beating he'd tried to deliver had become the beating he was receiving, and everyone could see it. "Enough!" A voice cut through the chaos, one of the senior guards pushing through the crowd. "Break it up! Everyone against the walls, now!" The circle began to dissolve as inmates scattered, some reluctantly, others eagerly. Nobody wanted to be caught on camera when the administration inevitably reviewed the footage. Brick stood swaying in the center of the yard, alone now except for Malik. His crew had melted into the dispersing crowd. His audience was disappearing. Even Knox had vanished, unwilling to be associated with what everyone would remember as Brick's first real defeat. "This isn't over," Brick said, the words slurred slightly. "You think you won something here? You think—" "I think," Malik interrupted gently, "that 40,000 people just watched you lose a fight you insisted on having. I think your paying subscribers just saw the truth behind the performance. And I think you're about to learn what happens when you build a reputation on fear and that fear stops working." Guards surrounded them now, batons out, shouting orders that neither man acknowledged. Reyes materialized beside Malik, grabbing his arm. "We need to move, right now." Malik let himself be pulled away, his eyes never leaving Brick's face. The bigger man stood alone in the center of the yard, blood dripping from his nose, his expression cycling through rage and confusion and something that might have been the first creeping awareness of real consequences. The guards separated them quickly, taking Malik one direction and Brick another. As they disappeared into different corridors, the inmates left behind began the work of turning what they'd witnessed into story. By dinner time, the tale would have mutated into a dozen different versions. By tomorrow, it would be legend. But the raw footage, The unedited reality of what had happened was already spreading across the internet. 40,000 live stream viewers had become 100,000 within the hour as people shared and reshared the video of a white supremacist gang leader getting systematically dismantled by the man he'd spent days torturing. The digital wildfire was just beginning. Inside a small administrative office deep in Riverside's restricted section, Malik sat handcuffed to a chair while three officials debated his fate. The senior guard who'd broken up the fight stood by the door. A warden's assistant reviewed footage on a laptop. And across from Malik sat the man who'd appeared in the cafeteria that morning, the one whose eyes had carried recognition. That was quite a performance, the man said, his voice neutral. Malik said nothing. 3 days of systematic abuse, humiliation on camera, forced degradation in front of hundreds of witnesses, and through all of it, you never once used the skills we know you have. The man leaned forward. Until today, until Brick gave you exactly what you needed, a public fight with witnesses everywhere and cameras recording every second. Still, Malik remained silent. The man smiled faintly. You're playing this perfectly. The stoic inmate routine, the mysterious silence. It's very effective. He glanced at the laptop screen where frozen footage showed Malik mid-throw, Brick airborne. But we both know what's really happening here. We both know why you're at Riverside and what your actual mission is. Malik's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but enough to confirm the man's statement. The problem, the man continued, is that you just escalated the timeline. We had a plan, a careful, methodical plan that would have taken months to execute properly. You were supposed to integrate, gather intelligence, build trust with the right people. Instead, you picked a fight with the biggest target in the facility on day 4. He picked the fight, Malik said quietly. I just chose when to end it. Semantics. The man stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the yard. Brick Harlan isn't just some gang leader. He's the linchpin of an organization that spans 3 states and moves more product than most cartels. We've been trying to get solid evidence on his operation for 2 years. And now, because you decided to go off script— I didn't go off script, Malik interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. I adapted to the situation Brick created. He was escalating anyway. The live streams, the private sessions, the increasing violence. He was building towards something that would have gotten me killed or forced me to blow my cover. This way, I control the narrative. The man turned from the window. You control nothing. You're an inmate. You have no authority here, no backup, no way to enforce anything you've started. I have witnesses, I have footage, I have 40,000 people who watched Brick lose control of his own spectacle. Malik leaned forward as much as the handcuffs allowed. And I have Brick himself, who's now facing a choice: escalate and risk more public failures, or back off and lose credibility with his organization. He'll escalate, the senior guard spoke up from his position by the door. Men like Brick don't back off, they double down. He's probably already planning his next move. Good, Malik said. The guard blinked. Good? The more he escalates, the more desperate he becomes. Desperate men make mistakes. They reach out to contacts they should keep hidden. They move money they should leave alone. They have conversations in places they think are secure. Malik's eyes found the man by the window again. And when they do, your people will be listening. A long silence settled over the room. The warden's assistant stopped reviewing footage. The guard shifted his weight uncomfortably, and the man by the window studied Malik with an expression that mixed frustration with grudging respect. You're assuming Brick makes those mistakes before he gets you killed. I'm counting on you to make sure he doesn't. We can't protect you directly. It would blow your cover completely. Then protect me indirectly. Put pressure in the right places. Make sure the guards who aren't on Brick's payroll are watching. Let word spread that the warden's office is reviewing the fight footage and taking the assault seriously. Malik's voice dropped lower. Give Brick something else to worry about besides revenge. The man considered this, his fingers drumming against the window frame. Finally, he nodded slowly. We can work with that. But Rivers, if this goes sideways, if Brick comes at you with something we can't intercept, you're on your own. The operation is bigger than one undercover agent. I know. Do you? The man walked back to the table, leaning in close. Because from where I'm sitting, you just turned yourself into the most famous inmate in the American prison system. That video has been shared 200,000 times in the last hour. News outlets are picking it up. Social media is exploding with commentary about prison violence and white supremacy. You've become a symbol, which means you've become a target for everyone, not just Brick. Malik met his gaze steadily. Then I guess we'd better move fast before someone else decides to make an example of me. The man straightened, shaking his head. You're either the bravest operative I've ever worked with or the craziest. Can't I be both? Despite himself, the man smiled. Get him back to his cell. Keep him in Gen Pop for now. Pulling him would raise too many questions. But I want eyes on him every hour. If Brick so much as looks at him wrong, I want to know about it. The guard unlocked Malik's handcuffs and hauled him to his feet. As they walked toward the door, the man spoke one more time. Rivers, that thing you said to Brick at the end, about learning what happens when fear stops working? Malik paused. Make sure you remember that lesson too. Because right now, a lot of people are very afraid of what you represent, and fear makes people unpredictable. They led Malik back through the corridors, past locked doors and checkpoints, deeper into the machine of incarceration that had swallowed thousands of men and ground most of them into shadows of themselves. But Malik walked those corridors like a man who knew they were temporary, like someone who understood that walls and bars were just obstacles, not prisons. When they reached his cell, Reyes was waiting. The older man looked up from his bunk, took in Malik's unmarked face and steady breathing, and let out a long exhale. You're alive. For now. That's not funny. Reyes stood as the door slid shut behind Malik. Do you have any idea what's happening out there? The entire facility is talking about what you did. Half the inmates think you're some kind of hero. The other half think you just signed your own death warrant. And me? He jabbed a finger at Malik's chest. I think you're playing a game I don't understand with rules that don't make sense. Malik climbed onto his bunk. Accurate assessment. Damn it, Malik. I'm trying to help you. I've been in this place long enough to know how things work. Brick has money, connections, and a whole network of people who'll do whatever he asks because they're either paid off or terrified. You just embarrassed him in the worst possible way. He's going to come back at you with everything he has. I know. Then why aren't you scared? Malik looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time Reyes saw something crack in that perfect calm. Not fear, but something almost like sadness. Because fear is a luxury, Malik said quietly, and I gave up luxuries a long time ago. Before Reyes could respond, before he could dig deeper into that cryptic answer, the cell block erupted in noise, shouting, the sound of running feet, guards yelling orders, and underneath it all, a rhythmic chanting that grew louder with each repetition. Wraith, Wraith, Wraith! Inmates were banging on their cell doors in rhythm, turning Malik's nickname into a war cry. Some were celebrating his victory. Others were simply caught up in the chaos of something different happening in a place where every day felt identical. But the effect was the same. Malik had become a symbol whether he wanted to be or not. A guard's voice boomed over the PA system. Lockdown! All inmates return to cells immediately. This is not a drill. Lockdown in effect until further notice. The chanting continued for another minute before gradually dying down, replaced by the usual sounds of protest and complaint that accompanied any unscheduled lockdown. Doors slammed, locks clicked. The cell block settled into the enforced quiet of confinement. Reyes sat on his bunk, staring at the wall. This is just the beginning, isn't it? Yes. And you knew it would be. Yes. Is it worth it? Whatever you're doing, whatever you're trying to prove, is it worth potentially dying in here? Malik was quiet for so long that Reyes thought he wouldn't answer. Then, just as Reyes was about to give up and try to sleep, Malik spoke. 3 years ago, Brick's organization moved a shipment of fentanyl through a distribution network that supplied half the Midwest. Cut it wrong, didn't test it properly, didn't care about quality control because profits were more important than people. His voice was flat, emotionless, reciting facts instead of feeling them. 16 people died in one weekend, teenagers mostly, kids who thought they were taking something relatively safe and ended up in coffins. Reyes turned to look up at Malik's bunk. One of those kids was 18 years old, had a full scholarship to study engineering, volunteered at shelters on weekends, never been in trouble, never caused problems, just made one mistake at one party because someone told him it was safe. The silence stretched thin between them. Was he family? Reyes asked softly. He was my brother. The words landed like a physical blow. Reyes closed his eyes, understanding flooding through him. This wasn't about justice in the abstract. This wasn't about taking down a criminal organization because it was the right thing to do. This was personal, intimate, the kind of wound that never healed, only scarred over. I'm sorry, Reyes said, because there was nothing else to say. Don't be. He made his choice. I made mine. And now Brick's going to pay for making his. By letting him torture you first? By letting him show the world exactly who he is when he thinks he's won. Malik shifted on his bunk, the springs creaking. Everything that happened over the last 3 days, the humiliation, the degradation, the live-streamed abuse, that's all evidence, documentation of a pattern. And when this goes to trial, and it will go to trial, that footage is going to show a jury exactly what kind of man Brick Harlan really is. What trial? You're both inmates. The system doesn't care what happens between prisoners as long as we don't kill each other. The system might not care, Malik said, but federal prosecutors do, especially when they're building a RICO case against an international distribution network and need to establish criminal enterprise and systematic abuse of power. Reyes sat up so fast he nearly hit his head on Malik's bunk. You're federal. You're a plant. I'm an inmate with a very specific set of skills who volunteered for a very specific mission. Does Brick know? He suspects, but suspicion isn't proof, and proof is what wins cases. So what happens now? You just wait for him to try to kill you and hope the evidence piles up before he succeeds? More or less. That's insane. That's the job. Reyes lay back down, his mind reeling with implications. Everything about Malik suddenly made sense, the training, the calm under pressure, the deliberate acceptance of abuse that would have broken a normal person. He'd been building a case from the inside, using himself as bait to draw out behavior that couldn't be explained away or hidden behind prison politics. The guy in the office, Reyes said, the one who pulled you after the fight, he's your handler. Something like that. And I'm guessing my presence here isn't exactly coincidental either. Malik didn't respond, which was answer enough. So what am I? Reyes asked. Backup? Insurance? Someone to make sure you don't actually get killed before you finish gathering evidence? You're someone who asked the wrong questions at a bar 5 years ago and ended up with a longer sentence than you deserved. Someone whose military record suggested you could be trusted in difficult situations. Someone whose cell assignment was carefully arranged to put you in a position to witness what was about to happen. And if I'd refused, if I'd requested a transfer or stayed out of it, then contingency plans were in place. But you didn't refuse. You noticed, you questioned, you cared. Malik's voice softened slightly. That matters. Reyes closed his eyes, processing everything. Part of him was angry at being manipulated, at having his life arranged without his knowledge or consent. But a larger part, the part that still remembered why he'd joined the Marines, why he'd spent 2 decades protecting people who'd never know his name, understood why it had been necessary. When this goes down, Reyes said, when the trial happens and Brick's organization gets exposed, what happens to you? To us? You get early release, clean record, compensation for your cooperation. And you? I finish what I started. It wasn't really an answer, but Reyes understood that some things couldn't be explained in advance. Some operations had variables that wouldn't resolve until the final moves were made. For what it's worth, Reyes said to the darkness, your brother would probably think you were crazy, but he'd also probably be proud. Malik didn't respond, but in the silence that followed, Reyes thought he heard something that might have been grief carefully controlled, emotion deliberately contained. They lay in their respective bunks as night settled over Riverside Correctional. 2 men who'd been strangers days ago, now bound together by secrets and circumstances beyond either's control. Outside their cell, 300 inmates settled into fitful sleep. Guards walked their rounds, cameras recorded empty hallways. And somewhere in the administrative section, prosecutors reviewed footage and built cases while a man who looked like a corrections officer but carried federal credentials made phone calls to people whose names would never appear in any official report. The machine was moving, the trap was closing, and Brick Harlan was about to learn that sometimes the prey you think you've caught was actually the predator all along. But the night wasn't over yet. Around 2 a.m., when the cell block had finally quieted to nothing but snoring and the occasional cough, Malik's eyes opened in the darkness. He'd been awake the entire time, breathing in the pattern of sleep but maintaining perfect awareness. He heard them before he saw them, soft footsteps that didn't match the regular guard rotation. 3 sets, moving with purpose toward his cell. Reyes's breathing pattern changed too. The older man was awake, listening. "Company," Reyes whispered. "I know." The footsteps stopped outside their door. Keys rattled. The lock disengaged with a click that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet. The door slid open to reveal 3 figures in guard uniforms. But the way they carried themselves, the tension in their shoulders, the anticipation in their stance, suggested this wasn't official business. "Rivers, you're coming with us." Malik swung down from his bunk, his movements calm despite the implication of the midnight extraction. "Where to?" "Ask questions when you're in a position to demand answers. Right now, you just do what you're told." They moved to cuff him. Malik didn't resist, but Reyes did, verbally at least. "This is against protocol. Unauthorized movement during lockdown requires approval from—" One of the fake guards turned to face him. "Calder, you've been a model prisoner for 4 years. Don't ruin that record by getting involved in something that doesn't concern you." The threat was implicit, but clear. Reyes could stay quiet and safe, or he could object and join whatever was about to happen to Malik. Malik caught Reyes's eye and shook his head fractionally. A message. Don't follow. Don't interfere. Reyes understood, but everything in his training screamed against letting it happen. They led Malik out of the cell and down corridors he'd walked before, but this time the route was different. Instead of heading toward administrative offices or interrogation rooms, they were moving deeper into the maintenance sections. The parts of the prison where security cameras had convenient blind spots and guard rotations had carefully timed gaps. The kind of places where accidents happened and nobody asked questions. Malik counted doors, memorized turns, cataloged every detail while maintaining the appearance of passive compliance. His handlers had trained him for scenarios exactly like this, situations where resistance would be fatal, but observation might provide leverage later. They stopped at a heavy steel door marked Boiler Room, authorized personnel only. One of the guards unlocked it and gestured inside. "After you." Malik stepped through into heat and darkness, punctuated by the rumble of machinery. The door clanged shut behind him, and emergency lighting flickered on, revealing a large space filled with pipes, valves, and industrial equipment. And standing in the center of it all, holding something that gleamed in the dim light, was Knox Mercer. Behind him, arranged in a semicircle like spectators at a private showing, stood the rest of Brick's inner circle, but Brick himself was nowhere to be seen. Knox stepped forward, and the gleam resolved into a blade, not a shiv this time, but a real knife, the kind that guards confiscated and destroyed when found. Someone had gone to considerable effort to smuggle it inside. "Brick sends his regards," Knox said, his voice echoing off the metal surfaces. "Says he's sorry he can't be here personally, but he's got alibis to maintain. Can't have people thinking he ordered this." He smiled, revealing teeth that had been broken and badly repaired over the years. "Lucky for me, I don't need an alibi. I'm just a prisoner who got into a fight with another prisoner. Happens all the time." Malik's eyes tracked every person in the room, calculating odds and exits. 5 men total. 1 blade. Multiple improvised weapons within reach if anyone knew where to look. The boiler room was large enough to move in, but cluttered enough to create obstacles. Not impossible odds, just very, very difficult ones. "You should have stayed down in the yard," Knox continued, advancing slowly. "Should have taken your beating and disappeared into the population like everyone else. But no, you had to be special, had to show off. Had to make Brick look weak in front of the whole world." "Brick made himself look weak," Malik replied calmly. "I just gave him the opportunity." Knox's expression darkened. "See, that's your problem, that mouth, that attitude. You think you're better than us just because you got some fancy training, but training don't matter when it's 5 against 1 in a locked room." 4 against 1, a voice said from the shadows. Everyone turned as Reyes stepped out from behind a bank of pipes, holding a pipe wrench that looked like it could crack skulls. I told those guards I had a plumbing emergency. Funny thing about night shift, they're real eager to delegate problems to inmates who know how to fix things. Knox's face cycled through surprise, anger, and calculation. You just made the worst mistake of your life, old man. Wouldn't be the first time. Reyes moved to stand beside Malik, his stance suggesting he remembered every moment of his combat training. And 5 against 2 sounds a lot more even than 5 against 1. The two men stood shoulder to shoulder in the dim light and rumble of machinery, facing odds that should have terrified them. But Malik was smiling, and Knox was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, he should have brought more men. The boiler room held its breath for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Steam hissed from overhead pipes, machinery rumbled in the background, and 5 men faced 2 in a space that suddenly felt too small for the violence about to unfold. Knox recovered first, his initial surprise hardening into cold determination. Doesn't matter if it's 1 or 2, you're both leaving here on stretchers. He gestured to his crew. Spread out, don't let them get to the door. The men moved with practiced coordination, forming a loose net that blocked any escape route. 2 positioned themselves near the exit. 1 flanked left, another went right. Knox stayed center, the knife held low and ready, his body language suggesting he knew exactly how to use it. Malik's eyes tracked every movement, his mind running calculations faster than conscious thought. The pipe wrench in Reyes's hands was a decent weapon, but required close range. The knife gave Knox reach and lethality. The other 4 men were unarmed, but trained enough to know that numbers created their own advantage. The room's layout offered some defensive positions, support columns, equipment banks, narrow passages between machines, but also created blind spots where attacks could come from unexpected angles. Reyes, Malik said quietly, his voice barely audible over the machinery. Remember your training, control the space, make them come to you. 20 years since I've been in actual combat, Reyes muttered back, but I guess it's like riding a bike. Except this bike wants to kill you. Fantastic. Knox ended the standoff by attacking. He came in fast, the knife leading, aiming for Malik's midsection in a thrust that would have opened him from ribs to hip if it connected, but Malik wasn't there. He'd already moved, pivoting outside the attack's line and bringing his forearm down in a sharp strike that should have disarmed Knox by hitting the pressure point in his wrist. Should have. Knox had been expecting it. He rolled with the impact, keeping his grip on the knife and using his free hand to grab for Malik's throat. The move was crude but effective, forcing Malik to choose between pressing the disarm or avoiding being grappled. Malik chose neither. He stepped in closer instead of away, getting inside Knox's reach where the knife became less effective. His knee came up hard into Knox's ribs, driving air from the bigger man's lungs. Knox grunted but didn't let go of the knife, swinging it in a tight arc that forced Malik to break away. While they separated, the rest of Knox's crew attacked. 2 went for Malik, 1 went for Reyes. The mathematics of the fight shifted instantly. No longer a duel, but a brawl, where attention divided meant death. Reyes met his attacker with the pipe wrench, swinging it in a controlled arc that spoke of muscle memory older than his prison sentence. The man dodged, but barely, the wrench passing close enough to his face that he felt the wind of its passage. Reyes followed through with the momentum, spinning into a second swing that caught the man's shoulder with a crack that might have been bone. The attacker stumbled back, clutching his arm, his face contorted in pain. "He broke my shoulder. The old man broke my—" "Then stay down," Reyes growled, advancing with the wrench held ready. "I did 20 years infantry. You really want to find out what else I remember?" The man backed away, cradling his injury, effectively removed from the fight. Malik faced worse odds. 2 men circled him from opposite sides while Knox waited for an opening with the knife. They attacked in sequence, trying to overwhelm him with coordinated strikes, high and low, left and right, forcing him to divide his attention between threats. It almost worked. Almost. But Malik had spent 5 years in professional fighting, where opponents studied his tendencies and planned specifically to counter them. These were prison brawlers trying to apply street tactics to a man who'd been trained by people who understood violence as both science and art. He slipped the first attacker's punch and used the man's momentum to send him stumbling into the second attacker. They collided in a tangle of limbs that gave Malik the half-second he needed to focus on Knox, who was already lunging with the knife. This time Malik didn't dodge. He met the attack head-on, his hands moving in a blur that caught Knox's knife arm at the wrist and elbow simultaneously. The technique was pure Krav Maga, brutal, efficient, designed not to disable, but to destroy. Malik twisted hard, his entire body torquing to leverage physics against anatomy. Knox's elbow hyperextended with a sound like green wood snapping. The knife clattered to the floor. Knox's scream echoed off the metal surfaces, raw and primal, the cry of a man who just learned that damage could be permanent. Malik released him and stepped back, leaving Knox cradling his ruined arm while the two men who'd collided finally untangled themselves and came at Malik with renewed desperation. They just watched their leader get dismantled in seconds. Fear and adrenaline made them dangerous in the way cornered animals are dangerous, unpredictable and willing to sacrifice everything for a chance at survival. The first one grabbed a length of pipe from a nearby rack and swung it like a baseball bat. Malik ducked under it, came up inside the swing, and drove his palm into the man's sternum hard enough to send him backwards into a support column. The man's head bounced off the metal with a hollow thud, and he slid to the floor, conscious but dazed. The second attacker tried to grapple, going for a bear hug that would have pinned Malik's arms. But Malik dropped his weight at the last instant, making himself heavier than the attacker expected. The shift in balance sent both men to the floor, where Malik immediately reversed the position, ending up on top with his forearm pressed against the man's throat. "Stay down," Malik said, applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult. "I don't want to hurt you more than necessary." The man's eyes went wide. He nodded frantically, hands coming up in surrender. Malik released him and stood, turning to assess the situation. Knox was down, clutching his destroyed elbow and rocking back and forth. 3 of his crew were incapacitated, one with a broken shoulder, one concussed, one choosing surrender over continued punishment. That left one man standing, and he was currently backing toward the door with his hands raised. "I'm out," the man said, his voice shaking. "I didn't sign up for this. Brick said it would be easy. Said you'd go down quick and you believed him," Reyes finished, still holding the pipe wrench. "Bad choice." The man reached the door and fumbled with the lock. It took him 3 tries to get it open, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the mechanism. When it finally opened, he disappeared into the corridor at a dead run. Silence fell over the boiler room, broken only by Knox's labored breathing and the steady hum of machinery. Malik walked over to where the knife had fallen and picked it up carefully, examining it in the dim light. "Smuggled," he said, more to himself than to Reyes. "Good quality. Someone paid serious money to get this inside." He looked at Knox, who was still writhing in pain. "Who brought it in, Knox? Who on the outside is supplying Brick's operation?" Knox spat blood onto the concrete. "Go to hell." Wrong answer. Malik crouched beside him, the knife held loosely in his hand. Not threatening, just present. "You're looking at aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit murder. Your elbow's shattered, which means you'll need surgery and months of physical therapy you won't get in here. And all of that is assuming the guards who find us believe your story over mine." "They'll believe whatever Brick tells them to believe," Knox gasped. "He owns half the guards in this place." "He owned them," Malik corrected. "Past tense. Because right now there's a camera in this room that's been recording everything since you walked in." Knox's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the shadows. "You're lying." "Am I?" Malik gestured vaguely at the ceiling. "The warden's office has been investigating Brick's operation for months. You really think they'd let an undercover operative wander around without backup surveillance?" It was a bluff. There was no camera, no evidence beyond what Malik and Reyes could testify to. But Knox didn't know that, and fear made people believe things they otherwise wouldn't. Knox's face went pale. "You're a cop." "I'm whatever I need to be to get justice for the people Brick's organization destroyed." Malik stood, pocketing the knife. "And right now, you have a choice. You can keep protecting Brick and spend the next 20 years in maximum security with a ruined arm and conspiracy charges. Or you can tell me who's running the supply chain and maybe walk away from this with something resembling a future." "He'll kill me," Knox whispered. "If I talk, Brick will have me killed. You don't understand what you're asking." I understand perfectly. I understand that loyalty to a man who sent you into a fight he knew you'd lose is worthless. I understand that Brick's upstairs right now maintaining his alibi while you're down here bleeding. And I understand that when this all comes crashing down, and it will come crashing down, the people who cooperate are the ones who survive. Reyes watched the exchange with the careful attention of a man who'd interrogated enemy combatants in war zones. He recognized the technique Malik was using, not torture or threats, but the simple application of logic and self-interest. Make the target understand that their current path led to destruction and offer them an alternative that, while not ideal, was at least survivable. Knox looked at his shattered elbow, then at the men scattered around the boiler room, then back at Malik. The calculation was visible on his face, weighing loyalty against survival, fear against hope. "There's a lawyer," Knox said finally, his voice barely audible. "Name's Celeste Vane. She handles Brick's legal work, but she also handles other things. Money transfers, evidence disposal, witness intimidation. She's the one who brought the knife in. Said it was insurance, that if things got complicated, we needed to be able to handle problems permanently." Malik's expression didn't change, but Reyes saw his hand tighten fractionally around the knife handle. This was new information, important information, the kind of lead that could crack an entire operation open. "How does she get contraband inside?" "I don't know the details. Brick kept that compartmentalized, but she's got connections to someone on the guard staff, someone high enough that inspections get missed and cameras malfunction at convenient times." "Names?" Knox shook his head. "I don't have names. Brick's paranoid about operational security. He keeps everyone in their own lane. I know about Vane because I had to coordinate with her for the legal stuff after I got brought up on assault charges last year. But the supply chain, the distribution network, the financial side, that's all above my level." Malik studied him for a long moment, looking for tells that would indicate deception. He found none. Knox was telling the truth, or at least the truth as he knew it. "What about the live streams, the paying subscribers who watch Brick's performances?" "That's all handled through encrypted platforms, dark web stuff. Vane set it up through some tech guy on the outside. Money comes in through cryptocurrency, gets laundered through what looks like legitimate donations to prison reform charities." Knox laughed bitterly. "The irony's not lost on Brick. He's using people's desire to help prisoners to fund his operation inside the prison." "Poetic," Malik said dryly. He looked at Reyes. "We need to move. That guy who ran is probably sounding alarms right now." "What about them?" Reyes gestured to the incapacitated crew members. "Leave them. They'll tell whatever story they want, but without evidence, we were never here." Malik walked to the door, listening for sounds in the corridor. "Knox gave us what we needed. The rest is up to the people running the actual investigation." They slipped out of the boiler room and into the maze of maintenance corridors, moving quickly but carefully, avoiding the routes that would take them past guard stations or cameras. Malik navigated with the certainty of someone who'd studied the prison's layout extensively before ever setting foot inside. "You planned for this," Reyes said as they moved. "The fight in the boiler room, you knew they'd try something." "I knew Brick would escalate, knew he couldn't afford to let the yard fight stand as his last public appearance. The boiler room was the obvious choice. Isolated, lots of ambient noise, established pattern of accidents happening there." "So you walked into a trap." "I walked into an opportunity to get Knox alone and scared enough to talk. There's a difference." They reached a junction where the maintenance corridors intersected with the main cell block. Malik paused, checking the schedule he'd memorized for guard rotations. "We've got 90 seconds before the next patrol. After that, we're back in our cell, and this never happened." "What about Knox's testimony? What about the lawyer?" "Knox's testimony is contaminated. He'll claim we forced it out of him under duress. But the lawyer's name is enough. Federal investigators can follow that thread, and one thread is all they need to unravel the whole operation." They waited in the shadows until the corridor cleared, then walked calmly back to their cell as if they'd never left. The door was still unlocked. The guards who'd come for Malik had been sloppy, counting on him being gone long enough that an unlocked cell wouldn't matter. They slipped inside and Malik pulled the door shut manually, the lock engaging with a soft click. Reyes collapsed onto his bunk, adrenaline finally draining from his system and leaving exhaustion in its wake. I'm too old for this. Way too old. You did good back there. That shoulder shot was textbook. 20 years out of practice, and I still haven't lost the muscle memory. Reyes flexed his hand, feeling the ache where he'd gripped the pipe wrench. But I'll be feeling this tomorrow. Malik climbed onto his own bunk, settling in as if the last hour hadn't happened. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Interesting how? Knox's crew is going to need medical attention. Questions are going to be asked about what happened in that boiler room. Brick's going to realize we not only survived his trap, but turned it against him. And somewhere in an office building outside these walls, a lawyer named Celeste Vane is about to have a very bad day when federal agents start asking questions about her client list. Reyes closed his eyes, processing the implications. This is really happening. You're actually going to bring down Brick's entire operation. Not me. I'm just the guy gathering evidence. The people who bring it down are the ones who'll turn that evidence into indictments. Malik paused. But yeah, it's really happening. Sleep came fitfully for both men, punctuated by the sounds of the cell block at night and the awareness that they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Malik had moved from passive intelligence gathering to active disruption. The game had changed, and with it, the stakes. Morning came with the usual chaos of 300 men preparing for another day of incarceration. But something was different. Word had spread overnight about the boiler room incident, distorted and exaggerated in the retelling, but containing enough truth to shift the prison's social dynamics. Knox and his crew had been found and taken to the infirmary. Knox needed emergency surgery on his elbow. The others had various injuries that raised questions about what exactly had happened. The man who'd run from the boiler room had disappeared into protective custody, refusing to speak about the incident, and Brick was nowhere to be seen. At breakfast, Malik and Reyes sat at their usual table while the cafeteria buzzed with speculation. Some inmates claimed Knox had been jumped by a rival gang. Others said it was payback from someone Brick had wronged years ago. A few, the ones who'd been paying closest attention, whispered that it had something to do with the Wraith and the increasingly obvious fact that Malik was more than he appeared. He's hiding, Reyes said quietly, scanning the room. Brick's not here. He's always here for breakfast. It's part of his routine. Showing up, holding court, reminding everyone who runs the place. He's not hiding, Malik replied. He's regrouping, trying to figure out his next move now that the direct approach failed. What do you think he'll do? Something desperate. Something that puts distance between him and the violence while still achieving his goal. Reyes was about to respond when the cafeteria doors opened and a group of guards entered, led by the warden himself, a stern man in his 60s who rarely left his office except for serious incidents. The room went silent as he walked to the center of the space, his presence commanding attention without needing to demand it. "Gentlemen," the warden said, his voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "I'm sure you've all heard about the incident last night. Let me be clear. Violence of any kind will not be tolerated in this facility. We are conducting a full investigation into what happened, and anyone with information is encouraged to speak with their case managers." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "Additionally, I'm announcing some immediate changes to our operational procedures. All contraband sweeps will be increased. Guard rotations will be randomized to prevent predictability. And we will be conducting individual interviews with inmates identified as potential witnesses or persons of interest." His gaze landed on Malik, holding for just a moment longer than random chance would account for. "We're also bringing in external oversight to review our security protocols and ensure that Riverside Correctional maintains the highest standards of safety and accountability." The announcement sent ripples through the cafeteria. External oversight meant federal investigators. Federal investigators meant people were going to be asking questions that couldn't be deflected or ignored, and everyone in the room who had something to hide suddenly felt very exposed. The warden left without further comment, his guards following. As the cafeteria noise resumed, louder now, fueled by anxiety and speculation, Malik allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "That's the signal," he said to Reyes. "The investigation's moving into its active phase." "How can you tell?" "Because external oversight doesn't get announced unless it's already in motion. They've been watching, gathering evidence, and now they're ready to start applying pressure." Malik stood, picking up his tray. Things are about to move very fast. He was right. By midday, federal agents in suits began appearing in the administrative sections. By afternoon, guards were being pulled from their posts for questioning. By dinner, 3 corrections officers had been suspended pending investigation, and rumors were flying about searches being conducted in staff lockers and offices. And still, Brick remained invisible. Malik spent the day in the yard, maintaining his usual routine while watching the prison's power structure begin to crack. Inmates who'd been loyal to Brick started distancing themselves, sensing that association with him was becoming a liability. Guards who'd been on his payroll suddenly remembered they had other duties that took them far from his usual territories. The empire that had seemed unshakable days ago was trembling. Reyes found him near the fence as the afternoon sun began to slant toward evening. "You need to see something." They walked together to the library, one of the few places inmates could access computers for approved purposes like legal research or educational programs. Reyes led Malik to a terminal in the corner and pulled up a news website. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Viral prison fight, video sparks, federal investigation into white supremacist gang activity." Below it, the story detailed how footage of Malik fighting Brick had exploded across social media, generating millions of views and prompting calls for investigations into prison safety and gang activity. Civil rights organizations had gotten involved. Politicians were making statements, and pressure was mounting for federal authorities to examine what was happening inside Riverside Correctional. But that wasn't what Reyes wanted to show him. He scrolled down to a sidebar article. Attorney Celeste Vane, under investigation for alleged prison corruption. Malik leaned closer, reading quickly. Federal agents had executed a search warrant on Vane's offices that morning. They'd seized computers, financial records, and client files. Sources close to the investigation suggested the search was connected to allegations of smuggling contraband into prisons and facilitating criminal enterprises on behalf of incarcerated clients. "Knox talked," Reyes said, "and somebody listened." Not just listened, acted. Malik's mind raced through the implications. If Vane was being investigated, she'd either cooperate to save herself or lawyer up and try to fight it. Either way, the pressure on Brick's operation had just intensified exponentially. "This is what you wanted," Reyes continued. "You baited Brick into attacking you, gathered evidence, fed information to your handlers, and now the whole thing's unraveling." "It's not unraveled yet. Vane being investigated doesn't mean she'll flip. Brick's still inside these walls with resources we don't know about. And desperate men do desperate things." As if summoned by the words, the PA system crackled to life. But instead of a guard's voice, it was Brick's. Somehow he'd gotten access to the system again. "Attention, Riverside, this is Brick Harlan, and I've got something to say to our friend the Wraith." Every inmate in the library looked up. Across the prison, 300 men stopped what they were doing to listen. "You think you're smart," Brick's voice echoed through the corridors. "You think you came in here and played me, made me look weak, set me up for a fall. But you forgot something important. I built this place. I know every corner, every secret, every person who owes me favors." Malik's expression hardened. "So here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be a tribunal. Warden's office is convening a special hearing to review the incidents of the past week, including your little performance in my yard. They're going to determine if you're too dangerous to remain in general population." Reyes grabbed Malik's arm. "That's not standard procedure. He's got someone inside the administration." Brick's voice continued, dripping with false reasonableness. "Now, I've been asked to provide testimony about your behavior, about how you attacked me unprovoked, about how you've been a threat to safety and order since the day you arrived. And I've got witnesses, lots of witnesses, who'll back up every word I say." The threat was clear. Brick was going to use the system itself as a weapon, manipulating the administrative process to get Malik classified as a security threat and transferred to a supermax facility where he'd be locked in solitary 23 hours a day, unable to complete his mission or testify about what he'd seen. "You wanted to play games?" Brick's voice turned cold. "Game's over. You lose. And tomorrow, everyone's going to watch you get buried under paperwork and procedure while I walk away clean." The PA clicked off. Silence filled the library, broken only by the hum of computers and the distant sound of guards shouting orders. Malik stood perfectly still, his mind calculating options and outcomes. Brick had just made his final move, Not violence, not intimidation, but bureaucratic warfare, using the prison's own rules and procedures to eliminate a threat he couldn't beat physically. It was smart. It was effective. And it was exactly the kind of move that would work unless Malik had a counter-strategy already in place. "Tell me you have a plan," Reyes said quietly. "Tell me you saw this coming." Malik turned to face him, and for the first time since arriving at Riverside, something like genuine concern flickered across his features. "I have a plan. But it requires everything to go perfectly. And in prison, nothing ever goes perfectly." "What do you need?" "I need that tribunal to happen exactly the way Brick expects it to. I need him confident, comfortable, convinced that he's won. And then? And then I need him to make one final mistake." Malik's expression hardened into something that looked almost like anticipation. Because the thing about men who build empires on lies, they forget what the truth sounds like. And tomorrow, in front of witnesses and cameras and people who can't be bought or intimidated, Brick's going to hear the truth. "Oh, what truth?" Malik smiled, but there was no humor in it. "That I didn't come here to fight him. I came here to give him enough rope to hang himself. And tomorrow morning, he's going to tie the knot." The tribunal convened at 9 a.m. in a conference room that had been hastily converted into something resembling a courtroom. Tables faced each other across a narrow aisle. A panel of 3 administrative officials sat elevated at the front, the warden flanked by a deputy warden and a representative from the State Corrections Board. Behind them, mounted conspicuously on the wall, was a camera recording everything for the official record. What most people in the room didn't know was that 3 other cameras had been installed overnight by federal agents, positioned to capture angles the official record might miss. Malik entered wearing standard orange, his hands cuffed in front of him, flanked by 2 guards who weren't on Brick's payroll. Reyes sat in the gallery section, along with a dozen other inmates who'd been called as potential witnesses. And at the opposite table, looking confident in a way that suggested he'd already won, sat Brick Harlan with his attorney. Not Celeste Vane, who was currently in federal custody, but a slick replacement who'd arrived overnight with expensive suits and cheaper ethics. The warden gavelled the proceeding to order. "This tribunal has been convened to review the incidents of the past week involving inmate Malik Rivers, also known as Mace, or the Wraith, and to determine appropriate classification and housing assignment going forward." He looked at Malik with an expression that gave nothing away. "Mr. Rivers, do you understand why you're here?" "Yes, sir." "And do you have representation?" "I'll represent myself." Brick's attorney, a man named Porter Griggs, who wore his moral flexibility like a badge, stood smoothly. "Your Honor, I'd like to object to the defendant acting as his own counsel. Given the serious nature of these allegations and Mr. Rivers's demonstrated capacity for violence, we believe." "Overruled," the warden said flatly. "This is an administrative hearing, not a criminal trial. Mr. Rivers has the right to speak on his own behalf." He turned to Griggs. "Proceed with your opening statement." Griggs launched into a carefully constructed narrative that painted Malik as a dangerous infiltrator who'd entered Riverside under false pretenses, concealed his professional fighting background, and systematically provoked confrontations designed to undermine prison safety. He showed edited footage from the yard fight that removed context and made Malik's defensive movements look like unprovoked attacks. He introduced testimony from guards who claimed Malik had been uncooperative and aggressive since arrival. It was a masterful performance, built on half-truths and strategic omissions, and it was working. The Corrections Board representative was taking notes with increasing frequency. The deputy warden's expression had shifted from neutral to concerned. When Griggs finished, he sat down with the satisfied air of a man who'd just closed a deal. Brick leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The warden looked at Malik. "Mr. Rivers, you may present your defense." Malik stood slowly. He didn't have notes, didn't have prepared remarks, didn't have any of the theatrical tools that Griggs had deployed. He just had his voice and the truth, and in that moment, it had to be enough. "I came to Riverside Correctional 5 days ago," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I came here because the legal system couldn't touch Brick Harlan from the outside. His operation is too sophisticated, too well protected by layers of intermediaries and deniable transactions, So they sent someone who could survive on the inside long enough to document what was really happening. Griggs shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is absurd. Mr. Rivers is now claiming to be some kind of undercover operative? This is fantasy, a desperate attempt to— Mr. Griggs, the warden interrupted. You'll have time for rebuttal. Let him speak. Malik continued as if the interruption hadn't happened. For 3 days, I endured systematic abuse designed to break me psychologically and establish Brick's dominance. I was forced to clean food off concrete with my tongue. I was beaten in the showers. I was subjected to humiliation that was live-streamed to paying subscribers who paid to watch a black man be degraded by a white supremacist. He paused, letting the words settle. I endured all of it without resistance because every second was being documented. Every insult, every assault, every moment of cruelty was creating a record of exactly what Brick's operation really is. Brick's smile had vanished. He leaned forward to whisper urgently to Griggs, who waved him off with visible irritation. On the 4th day, Malik went on, Brick escalated to a public fight because his audience demanded more extreme content. He thought he was creating entertainment. What he actually created was evidence of his own criminal enterprise, evidence that's now in the hands of federal investigators who've been watching this facility for months. The warden's expression hadn't changed, but something in his posture suggested Malik had his attention now. Last night, Brick sent 5 men to kill me in the boiler room. They brought a smuggled knife, contraband that was provided by his attorney, Celeste Vane, who is currently in federal custody facing charges related to this case. Malik pulled something from his pocket, the knife from the boiler room, which he'd kept hidden until this moment. He placed it on the table in front of him. This is the weapon they intended to use. It has fingerprints. It has a serial number that can be traced. And it represents just one piece of physical evidence in a conspiracy that spans multiple states. Griggs was on his feet again. Your Honor, I have no idea where Mr. Rivers obtained that object, but introducing unverified evidence in an administrative hearing is— Actually, a new voice said from the back of the room, the evidence has been verified. Everyone turned to see the man who'd appeared in the cafeteria days earlier, the one Malik had recognized and Reyes had noted. He walked forward now with the confident stride of someone who belonged exactly where he was, pulling out federal credentials as he approached. Special Agent Marcus Webb, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He held up his badge for the panel to see. I've been operating inside this facility as part of a joint task force investigating organized criminal activity, and everything Mr. Rivers just described is accurate and documented. The room erupted. Brick lunged from his chair, only to be restrained by guards who suddenly appeared from positions near the exits. Griggs was shouting objections that nobody was listening to. The corrections board representative looked like he'd just swallowed something toxic. Webb continued speaking over the chaos, his voice cutting through with practiced authority. For the past 6 months, we've been building a RICO case against an organization that uses prison populations as both labor force and customer base for drug distribution. Brick Harlan is the inside operator. Celeste Vane was the legal facilitator. And there's a network of corrupt guards and administrators who enabled the whole operation. He placed a tablet on the panel's table and tapped it once. Footage began playing, not the edited versions Griggs had shown, but complete unaltered recordings from the past 5 days. Malik being forced to his knees in the yard. The cafeteria humiliation. The boiler room attack. And underneath it all, audio recordings of Brick coordinating with people on the outside, arranging payments, ordering violence, bragging about his untouchable status. We have financial records, Webb said, his voice methodical now, listing evidence like items on a shopping list. We have witness testimony. We have documentation of contraband smuggling, assault, conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and racketeering. And we have Mr. Rivers, who volunteered to enter this facility as a federal cooperating witness specifically to gather evidence that would be admissible in court. Brick had stopped struggling against the guards, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally settling on something that looked almost like fear. For the first time in 8 years, he understood that he wasn't in control anymore. "This is a setup," Brick's voice cracked with desperation. "You can't do this. I have rights. I have lawyers who'll—" "Your lawyer is in custody," Webb interrupted, "and your rights are being perfectly preserved. You'll have every opportunity to defend yourself in federal court against charges that currently include leading a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, assault with intent to commit murder, and about 15 other felonies we're still cataloging. The warden had gone very still, his eyes moving between Webb, Malik, and the footage playing on the tablet. Agent Webb, how long has this operation been active? The investigation began 2 years ago after a cluster of overdose deaths in 3 states were traced back to product distributed through prison networks. We identified Brick's operation as a primary node 18 months ago. We approached Mr. Rivers 3 months ago because we needed someone who could survive the kind of targeted abuse Brick uses to maintain control. The warden turned to Malik. You volunteered for this. It wasn't a question, but Malik answered anyway. Yes, sir. One of those overdose victims was my younger brother. He was 18. He died because someone in Brick's distribution chain decided that purity standards were less important than profit margins. His voice remained steady, but something raw flickered beneath the surface. I volunteered because the legal system couldn't touch Brick from the outside, and I had the specific skills necessary to survive long enough on the inside to make a difference. Silence fell over the room. Even Griggs had stopped objecting, apparently realizing that his client's situation had just moved far beyond anything administrative procedure could address. Brick found his voice again, and this time it carried a different quality, not desperation, but cold fury. You think you're smart? You think this ends with me in a cell? He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. I've been running operations for 8 years. I've got connections you can't imagine. People on the outside who'll make sure you never see daylight again. You and your Fed friends might think you won, but all you did was make yourselves targets. Webb smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Actually, Mr. Harlan, you just did something very helpful. You just threatened a federal witness and a federal agent in front of cameras and a room full of witnesses. Add witness intimidation and threatening a law enforcement officer to your charge sheet. Brick's face went purple. I didn't threaten anyone. I was just saying that you have connections who'll ensure we never see daylight again, Webb finished, which, for anyone keeping track, is a textbook example of witness intimidation. He nodded to the guards. Take Mr. Harlan into federal custody. He's no longer the state's problem. As guards moved to secure Brick, something broke inside him. The control he'd maintained for so long, the calculated persona he'd built, the careful balance between intimidation and restraint, all of it shattered. He started shouting, and once started, he couldn't stop. You want to know about connections? I'll tell you about connections. I've got 3 guards on payroll here. I've got distribution networks in 7 prisons across 4 states. I've got product moving through routes that your federal task force hasn't even identified yet. His voice rose to a roar. I've got bank accounts in the Caymans. I've got suppliers in Mexico who move more weight in a week than your entire DEA seizes in a year. I've got politicians who take my money and look the other way when Griggs was trying to physically cover Brick's mouth, shouting about Fifth Amendment rights, but the damage was done. Brick had just confessed to federal crimes on camera in a room full of witnesses, and every word was being recorded from multiple angles. Webb let him rant for another 30 seconds before signaling the guards to remove him. As they dragged Brick toward the exit, he was still shouting names, locations, amounts, details that federal prosecutors would spend months verifying and cross-referencing. It was a confession more complete than most cooperating witnesses provided, delivered not in exchange for leniency, but in pure rage at having been outmaneuvered. When the doors finally closed behind Brick and his voice faded into the distance, the room felt suddenly very quiet. The warden looked at Webb. How many guards are being arrested? Currently, 5, but that number will likely grow as we trace the financial connections Brick just helpfully detailed. And the other inmates who were involved? Knox Mercer is cooperating in exchange for consideration on sentencing. The others are being processed based on their level of involvement. Webb turned to the Corrections Board representative. We'll need full access to personnel files, financial records, and surveillance footage going back 18 months. The representative nodded numbly, still processing what had just happened. Webb finally looked at Malik. You did good work. Better than we expected, honestly. We thought it would take weeks to get Brick rattled enough to make mistakes. You did it in 5 days. He made it easy, Malik replied. He built his empire on performance and intimidation. All I had to do was survive long enough for him to realize intimidation wasn't working, then give him a stage where his performance would become evidence. Still, taking that kind of abuse, maintaining cover, adapting when he escalated, that takes a particular kind of strength. Webb paused. Your brother would be proud. Malik's expression flickered. Grief, acknowledgement, something that might have been peace. I hope so. The warden cleared his throat. Mr. Rivers, I assume you will be leaving our facility now that your assignment is complete. With your permission, sir, yes. Permission granted. Agent Webb, please coordinate with my staff to handle the transfer paperwork. The warden stood, signaling the end of the tribunal. And Mr. Rivers, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about your brother. And I'm sorry you had to endure what you did to get justice for him. Thank you, sir. But I didn't just do it for him. I did it for all the people who've been hurt by organizations like BRICS, for all the families who've lost someone to product that never should have reached the streets, for everyone who thinks the system can't touch people like Brick Harlan. He paused. Today proved it can. It just takes patience. As the room began to clear, Reyes appeared at Malik's side. So that's it? You just walk out and leave the rest of us here? You're not staying, Webb said, overhearing. Reyes Calder, correct? Former Marine Corps, military intelligence? Reyes nodded warily. Your cooperation has been noted. We're expediting your early release based on assistance provided to a federal investigation. You'll be processed out within 48 hours. Reyes looked stunned. I barely did anything. I just backed him up in the boiler room. You witnessed critical events. You provided protection for a federal cooperating witness. And your military background meant you could be trusted in situations where most civilians would have panicked. Webb extended his hand. Thank you for your service, both to your country and to this investigation. Reyes shook the offered hand, still looking like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. What do I do on the outside? I've got no job, no prospects, a felony record. We can help with that, Webb said. Part of our witness assistance program includes job placement for cooperating witnesses and those who assisted them. If you're interested, we have positions available in security consulting. Former military with your experience would be valuable. Malik watched the exchange with something that might have been satisfaction. Take the offer, Reyes. You've earned a clean start. Over the next 2 hours, Riverside Correctional descended into controlled chaos. Federal agents swarmed the facility, executing search warrants and making arrests. 5 guards were taken into custody, along with 3 administrators who'd been receiving payments from BRICS operation. Dozens of inmates were pulled for questioning as investigators worked to map the full extent of the criminal network. In the yard, the regular population watched through windows as federal vehicles filled the parking lot and men in suits carried boxes of evidence to waiting vans. The prison's social structure, which had been built around BRICS dominance for 8 years, had collapsed in a single morning, and everyone was trying to figure out what came next. Malik spent those hours being debriefed, providing detailed statements about everything he'd witnessed, confirming evidence that investigators had gathered independently. When it was finally done, when he'd answered every question and signed every document, Webb walked him to a private exit where a federal vehicle waited. What happens now? Malik asked. To Brick, I mean. He faces trial in federal court on charges that'll put him away for life, even with the most lenient possible sentencing. His confession this morning gave us everything we needed to dismantle his organization. Names, routes, financial structures, all of it. We've already executed warrants in 3 states. By tomorrow, we'll have arrested most of his distribution network. And the subscribers? The people who paid to watch him degrade inmates? Webb's expression darkened. That's trickier. Most of them used encrypted platforms and cryptocurrency. We'll get some through IP tracing and financial forensics, but many will escape prosecution. He paused. But their content provider is gone. Their platform is shut down. And we're working with tech companies to identify and remove similar operations. It's not perfect justice, but it's something. Malik nodded slowly. What about Celeste Vane? She's attempting to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence against her is overwhelming. Smuggling contraband, facilitating criminal enterprises, witness tampering. She's looking at serious time. Her cooperation might reduce her sentence, but she's done practicing law. They reached the vehicle. Webb opened the door but didn't immediately gesture for Malik to enter. "I need to ask you something," Webb said. "This operation took a toll. Physically, psychologically, emotionally. You endured abuse that would have broken most people. You put yourself in situations where you could have been killed. And you did it all for a brother who's gone and can't thank you." He met Malik's eyes. "Was it worth it?" Malik was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the prison that had been his home for 5 days and his mission for much longer. "My brother died thinking drugs were safe because someone he trusted told him they were. He died thinking the system would protect him because that's what we're taught to believe. He died because people like Brick Harlan treat human lives as profit margins and nobody stopped them." He turned to face Webb directly. "So yes, it was worth it. Because somewhere out there, there's another 18-year-old kid who won't die this weekend because Brick's supply chain doesn't exist anymore. There's a family that won't get that phone call. There's a future that won't get destroyed." He paused. "I can't bring my brother back, but I can make sure his death meant something. And if I had to endure 100 Brick Harlans to do it, I would." Webb nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think your brother would be proud. And I know the families of the people whose lives you just saved would thank you if they knew. They don't need to know. They just need to be safe." Malik climbed into the vehicle. "Where to now?" "Debriefing facility for a few days while we process everything. Medical evaluation to make sure you're physically okay. Psychological counseling because you've earned it." Webb leaned against the door. "After that, you're free to go. We'll maintain contact in case we need you for trial testimony, but your active assignment is complete." "And the Wraith? The fighter everyone remembers? That's up to you. You disappeared 5 years ago to take on missions like this. You could stay disappeared, or you could return to fighting, or you could do something completely different." Webb smiled. "You've earned the right to choose your own path." The vehicle pulled away from Riverside Correctional, leaving behind a facility in upheaval and a population trying to understand how their world had changed so completely in less than a week. Through the tinted windows, Malik watched the prison shrink in the distance until it was just another building in a landscape of buildings. Reyes was processed out 2 days later, walking through the same exit with the same sense of unreality. He found Malik waiting in the parking lot, leaning against a car that definitely didn't belong to the federal government. "You waited," Reyes said, surprised. "Figured you might want a ride." Malik gestured to the passenger seat. "And maybe someone to help you navigate the first few hours of freedom. It's been 4 years. World's changed." Reyes climbed in, looking around at the interior with the wonder of someone who'd forgotten what civilian vehicles felt like. "Where are we going?" "First, we're getting food that doesn't come on a tray. Then I'm taking you to meet some people from the security consulting firm Webb mentioned. They're good people, fair employers, and they specifically work with veterans who need a second chance." "You set this up." "I made a phone call. You'll still have to interview and prove yourself, but you'll get a fair shot. That's more than most ex-cons get." They drove in silence for a while, watching the world pass by outside. Finally, Reyes spoke. "What you did in there, enduring what you endured, keeping your cover, bringing down Brick's empire, that took a kind of courage I'm not sure I have. You had it when it mattered. That fight in the boiler room, backing me up when you could have stayed safe, that was courage. I had a pipe wrench and muscle memory. You had a plan." Malik smiled. "Plans don't work without people willing to execute them. You were part of this, Reyes. Don't downplay what you contributed." "What about you? What happens to the Wraith now?" "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to return to fighting. Part of me thinks I've got other skills that could be useful in other ways." He glanced at Reyes. "Webb's team does this kind of work regularly, going after criminal organizations that operate in spaces where traditional law enforcement can't reach. They could use someone with my particular background." "You'd do it again? Go undercover, endure that kind of abuse? If it meant stopping people like Brick from destroying lives?" "Yes," without hesitation. Malik's voice carried certainty. "The world has enough fighters throwing punches in cages. It needs more people willing to take punches for a cause that matters." They stopped at a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1975. Inside, they ordered burgers and coffee and sat in a booth by the window, watching normal people live normal lives. For Reyes, who'd spent 4 years in concrete and steel, the simple act of ordering his own food felt revolutionary. I keep expecting a guard to tell me I'm in the wrong place, Reyes admitted, like this is all a test and I'm about to fail it. That feeling fades. Takes time, but it fades. Malik sipped his coffee, savoring the taste of something that wasn't instant powder mixed with lukewarm water. My first mission after leaving fighting, I spent 3 days after extraction just walking around a park. Couldn't believe I could go anywhere without asking permission. How many missions have you done? This was number 4, each one different, each one necessary. He set down his coffee. And each one bringing me a little closer to peace with what happened to my brother. Do you think you'll ever get there? To peace, I mean? Malik was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe peace isn't the goal. Maybe the goal is just making sure his death created enough positive change in the world that the scale balances somehow. He looked out the window at the ordinary afternoon unfolding outside. Every person who doesn't overdose because Brick's network is gone, every family that stays whole because the supply chain was disrupted, every kid who makes it to 19 instead of dying at 18, that's my brother's legacy. And maybe that's as close to peace as I'm going to get. Their food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence. 2 men who'd survived something together and come out the other side changed but intact. 3 weeks later, Malik sat in a federal courthouse watching Brick Harlan stand before a judge to hear the charges against him. The list took 10 minutes to read. The evidence took 3 days to present. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing would come later, but the verdict itself was what mattered. Brick Harlan, who'd believed he was untouchable, who'd built an empire on cruelty and exploitation, who'd destroyed countless lives in pursuit of profit, had been held accountable. As marshals led him away, Brick's eyes found Malik in the gallery. They stared at each other across the courtroom, and in that moment, understanding passed between them. Brick finally comprehended what Malik had been from the beginning. Not a victim, not prey, but a weapon specifically designed to bring him down. Malik didn't smile, didn't gloat, just held Brick's gaze with the same calm he'd maintained throughout 5 days of abuse, letting Brick see exactly what patience looked like when it finally achieved its purpose. Then the doors closed, and Brick was gone. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions about the case and the viral videos and the Wraith's role in bringing down a criminal empire. Malik ignored them, walking past cameras and microphones to where a car waited. Webb was leaning against it. "Congratulations," the agent said. "Justice served." "Justice attempted," Malik corrected. "Brick's in prison, but the damage he caused can't be undone. The people who died can't be brought back." "No, but the people who might have died won't. That counts for something." "It does." Malik looked back at the courthouse. "What happens to the others? Knox, the guards, the administrators?" "Deals are being made. Some will testify against others in exchange for reduced sentences. Some will fight and lose. The system's not perfect, but it's working." Webb paused. "And because of what you did, it has everything it needs to work properly." "What about the subscribers? The people who paid to watch?" "We're still tracking them down. Arrested 12 so far, working on identifying more." Webb's expression hardened. "They're harder to prosecute. Watching isn't the same as doing in the eyes of the law, but we're building cases." Malik nodded. It wasn't perfect justice, but perfect justice didn't exist. This was real justice. Flawed, incomplete, but meaningful. "I got a call," Webb said, changing subjects, "from a promoter. Apparently the Wraith going viral has regenerated interest in seeing you fight again. They're offering serious money for a comeback bout." "And I told them I'd pass along the message but couldn't make promises." He studied Malik. "What do you want to do?" Malik thought about the question, thought about returning to the cage, to the controlled violence that had made him famous, thought about the thrill of competition and the clarity of fighting under rules that made sense. Then he thought about his brother, about Riverside, about the difference between fighting for entertainment and fighting for something that mattered. "Tell them thanks, but I'm retired from that kind of fighting." He met Webb's eyes. "But if you've got another mission, another Brick Harlan who needs to be brought down from the inside, I'm interested." Webb smiled. Funny you should mention that. We've been building a case against a human trafficking ring operating through truck stops in the southeast. Need someone who can go undercover as a driver. It's dangerous, it's long-term, and it would require you to endure whatever it takes, Malik interrupted. If it stops people from being hurt, I'll endure whatever it takes. They shook hands, and Malik climbed into the car. As it pulled away from the courthouse, he looked back one last time at the building where Brick's fate had been sealed. Justice wasn't always immediate. It wasn't always perfect. But it was possible. And sometimes, all it took was one person willing to endure hell long enough to drag the monsters into the light. 6 months later, Reyes sat in an office at the security consulting firm, reviewing files for a new client. The job had been good for him, challenging but honest, using his skills for legitimate purposes, surrounding him with people who valued experience over criminal records. His phone buzzed with a news alert. He opened it and read the headline. Undercover operative helps dismantle Southeast human trafficking ring. There was no photo, no name, just a brief description of a months-long investigation that had resulted in 47 arrests and the rescue of over 100 victims. But Reyes knew. He recognized the pattern, the patience, the willingness to endure abuse for a cause that mattered. He thought about sending a message but decided against it. Malik was wherever he needed to be, doing whatever needed to be done. And if history was any indication, he was doing it with the same quiet courage that had brought down Brick Harlan. Reyes closed the article and returned to his work, carrying with him the knowledge that somewhere in America, the Wraith was still fighting, not in cages for crowds, but in shadows for justice. And that made all the difference. The world would remember Malik Rivers as a fighter who vanished at the peak of his career. They'd remember viral videos of prison fights and courtroom dramas. They'd remember the Wraith as a legend who appeared briefly, changed everything, and disappeared again. But the people who mattered, the families whose loved ones came home safe because a supply chain was disrupted, the victims who escaped trafficking because an operation was dismantled, the communities that healed because evil was confronted, they wouldn't know his name, wouldn't know his face, wouldn't know that someone had chosen to endure hell on their behalf. They would just live, free and safe and whole. And for Malik Rivers, for the Wraith, for the man who'd lost his brother and found his purpose in the depths of that loss, that was enough. That was everything. Because revenge was loud and temporary, but justice was quiet and forever. And patience, the kind that let a man endure degradation without breaking, survive attacks without surrendering, and wait for exactly the right moment to strike, was the most powerful weapon of all. Brick Harlan learned that lesson too late. The world was learning it now. And somewhere in the shadows, the Wraith was teaching it to the next monster who thought they were untouchable. One mission at a time. One life saved at a time. One victory for justice at a time. Until the scales finally balanced. Until the debt was paid. Until peace was possible.